You're making the worst mistake of your life. The stagecoach driver's warning hung in the dusty air as Mara Ellison stepped down onto the sun-scorched street of Red Hollow. Her fingers trembled against the leather of her travel bag, but her chin stayed high. Across the street, a man stood alone, tall, broad-shouldered, silent as stone. Colt Rayner, the stranger she'd agreed to marry through nothing but letters and desperation. The townspeople watched from shadowed doorways, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Mara felt their judgment like a physical weight. She'd traded one kind of danger for another, stepping into a town that already hated her toward a man no one trusted. But there was no turning back now. If you want to see how far love and survival can take two people the world has turned against, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Colt Rayner received the letter, the sky over Red Hollow burned red with dawn. He stood on the porch of his ranch house, coffee steam rising into the cold air, reading words that would change everything. The paper felt strange in his calloused hands, too clean, too deliberate for this rough country. The handwriting was careful, educated, nothing like the scrawled orders and bills that usually found their way to his door. Mr. Rayner, I am writing to you regarding your advertisement for a wife. I understand this is an unconventional arrangement, but my circumstances require unconventional solutions. I am 26 years old, capable, and willing to work. I ask for safety and a new beginning. In return, I offer loyalty, competence, and partnership. If you are still seeking a wife, I will arrive in Red Hollow on the 23rd of September. Respectfully, Mara Ellison Colt read it 3 times, his expression unchanged. The advertisement had been Jake Morrison's idea, placed in the Eastern papers as a joke after too much whiskey at the saloon. A man like you needs a woman to soften those hard edges, Jake had laughed, slapping the bar. Otherwise you'll turn to stone out there all alone. Colt hadn't bothered to cancel it. He'd forgotten about it entirely. Until now. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. The September date was 2 weeks away. Plenty of time to send a telegram, call the whole thing off. Tell this Mara Ellison that it had been a mistake, that he wasn't looking for a wife, that she should stay wherever she was. But he didn't. Colt Rayner was a man of few words and fewer illusions. He'd come to Red Hollow 5 years ago with nothing but a strong back and a determination to disappear. The ranch he'd built sat 3 miles outside town, far enough to avoid the gossip, close enough to sell his cattle. He kept to himself, paid his debts, and asked nothing from anyone. The town respected his work ethic. They feared his silence. He's got darkness in him, the women whispered at church socials. You can see it in his eyes. Fought in the war, the men muttered over cards. Came back different. They all did. The truth was simpler and more complicated than their speculation. Colt had seen too much, lost too much, and learned that trust was a luxury that got men killed. He'd built his life around certainty, land, cattle, routine. A wife hadn't been part of the plan. But Mara Ellison's letter sat against his chest like a question he couldn't quite ignore. Over the next 2 weeks, Red Hollow buzzed with the news. Colt Rayner's getting himself a mail-order bride, announced Mrs. Beatrice Fletcher, the postmistress, to anyone who'd listen. Coming all the way from Philadelphia. Can you imagine what kind of woman answers an advertisement like that? The desperate kind, replied Martha Green, owner of the general store, or the kind running from something. Either way, Beatrice continued, she's walking into trouble. That man's been alone too long. He's forgotten how to be around people. At the Silver Dollar Saloon, the speculation took a rougher edge. I give it 3 months, declared Tom Brennan, a ranch hand from the Double J. She'll take one look at that cold bastard and run screaming back east. If she makes it that long, added Charlie West, dealing cards with practiced efficiency. Town like this isn't kind to outsiders, especially women with no people. Jake Morrison, who'd started the whole mess, leaned back in his chair with a grin. Maybe she'll be good for him. Colt needs something to care about besides cattle and silence. Or maybe she'll be the thing that finally breaks him, Charlie said quietly, laying down a straight flush. Some men aren't meant to have what they want. Colt heard the talk. He always did. But he'd stopped caring about Red Hollow's opinions years ago. He prepared for Mara's arrival with the same methodical attention he gave everything. He fixed the broken step on the porch, aired out the spare bedroom, the one he'd been using for storage, bought new linens from Martha Green, enduring her pointed questions with monosyllabic answers. "I hope she knows what she's getting into," Martha had said, wrapping the sheets in brown paper. "She's a grown woman," Colt replied. "I expect she does." "Men always think women know what they're choosing," Martha shot back. "But we don't always get the whole truth, do we?" Colt had taken his package and left without responding. The night before Mara's scheduled arrival, he sat on his porch and allowed himself to wonder about her. What kind of woman leaves everything familiar for a man she's never met? What was she running from? What did she hope to find? He told himself it didn't matter. This was a practical arrangement. She needed safety. He needed what? Company? Help with the ranch? Someone to cook meals that weren't bacon and beans? The truth scratched at the edges of his thoughts, but he didn't let it in. Loneliness was for men who hadn't learned to live with themselves. Colt Rayner had made peace with solitude long ago, or so he told himself. September 23rd arrived with a wind that tasted like dust and change. Colt rode into Red Hollow an hour before the stage was due, hitching his horse outside the general store. The town seemed more crowded than usual, people finding excuses to linger near the main street, pretending they had business that just happened to keep them close to the stagecoach stop. He ignored them, leaning against a post with his hat low, arms crossed over his chest. Beatrice Fletcher positioned herself prominently outside the post office, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Martha Green swept her already clean storefront. Even Reverend Thomas found reason to stand outside the church, prayer book in hand, as if he'd just finished some spiritual errand. The stage rattled into town right on time, wheels churning up dust, horses snorting and stamping. The driver, a weathered man named Hank, who'd been running this route for 20 years, climbed down from his perch and opened the door. "Red Hollow," he called out. "End of the line." The first passenger was a traveling salesman Colt recognized from previous visits. He clambered out, complaining about the rough roads. Then a small gloved hand appeared in the doorway. Mara Ellison stepped down from the stagecoach, and the town held its breath. She was not what they expected, not soft or fragile, not cowering or uncertain. She stood in the dusty street in a dark blue traveling dress, her auburn hair pulled back severely, her face pale but composed. She had a carpetbag in one hand and a wooden case in the other. Her eyes, gray-green, sharp as glass, swept across the gathered crowd with perfect awareness of their judgment. She didn't flinch from it. Hank pulled down a small trunk from the top of the stage. "That's everything, miss. You sure about this?" "Quite sure," Mara replied. Her voice carried a clear Eastern accent, educated, refined, wrong for this dusty frontier town in every way. "You're making the worst mistake of your life," Hank said, not unkindly. Mara's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "That remains to be seen." She turned, and her eyes found Colt immediately. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the width of the street. Two strangers bound by letters and circumstance, watched by a town that wished them nothing but failure. Colt pushed off from the post and walked toward her, his boots striking the hard-packed earth with steady rhythm. The crowd's whispers rose like wind through dry grass. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the exhaustion around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped her bag just a fraction too tight. "Miss Ellison," he said. His voice was deep, rough from disuse. "Mr. Rayner." She met his gaze directly. "Thank you for allowing me to come." "You have other luggage?" "Just the trunk." He nodded, moving past her to lift it easily. "This way." Mara hesitated for just a heartbeat. The last moment she could change her mind, climb back on that stage, return to whatever life she'd fled. Then she picked up her bags and followed him. The whispers exploded behind them. "Did you see her clothes? That's city fabric. Too proud by half. This won't end well." "What kind of scandal is she running from?" "Colt Rayner and a woman like that? Oil and water?" Mara kept her eyes forward, her spine straight. Colt loaded her trunk into his wagon without comment, then offered his hand to help her up to the seat. His palm was rough, warm, solid. She took it, settling herself on the worn bench. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horse moved forward. They left Red Hollow behind in silence. The ranch sat in a valley between low hills, protected from the worst of the wind by a natural bowl of land. The house was simple but well built. Solid logs, a stone chimney, a wide porch. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, corrals for the horses and cattle. It was more isolated than Mara had imagined. More beautiful, too. Colt pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "I'll show you around," he said, climbing down and coming around to offer his hand again. This time Mara studied him as she accepted his help. He was taller than she'd realized, broad through the shoulders and chest, his face weathered and hard-lined. Not handsome in any conventional sense, but compelling, like the land itself, shaped by wind and sun and survival. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and gave away nothing. He led her inside. The house was clean but sparse. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A rough-hewn table sat near the window. Shelves held basic supplies. Everything was organized with military precision. "Your room's through there," Colt said, pointing to a door on the left. "Mine's on the right. There's a pump outside for water. Outhouse is behind the barn. I've got a hired man, Danny, comes 3 times a week to help with the cattle. Otherwise, it's just us." Mara set down her bags, looking around. "It's more than adequate." "It's not Philadelphia." "No," she agreed. "It's not." Colt studied her for a moment, and she had the sense of being carefully assessed. "I need to be clear about something," he said finally. "I'm not looking for romance or anything like it. You needed a way out of whatever situation you left behind. I need help running this place. That's the arrangement. I understand." "Do you?" He moved closer, his expression unreadable. "Because that town we just left? They're already writing our story. They've decided you're trouble, and I'm a fool. It's going to get harder before it gets easier." Mara lifted her chin. "I've weathered worse than gossip, Mr. Rayner." "Have you?" Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity, maybe, or doubt. "I wouldn't be here if I hadn't." They stood in the quiet house, 2 damaged people circling each other like wary animals, testing for weakness, searching for truth. "You can call me Colt," he said finally. "Then you should call me Mara." He nodded. "Supper's at 6. I'll show you the rest of the property tomorrow." He turned toward the door. "Colt?" He stopped, looking back. "Why did you let me come? You could have sent a telegram, told me it was a mistake." He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't know yet." The door closed behind him, leaving Mara alone in her new home, 3 miles from a town that hated her, beside a man who was still a stranger, in a life she'd chosen over the one that had nearly destroyed her. She unpacked methodically, hanging her few dresses in the small wardrobe, arranging her books on the windowsill, placing her mother's silver brush on the rough dresser. Each item an anchor, a small claim to this space, this new existence. When everything was arranged, she sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself one moment of doubt. "What have I done?" Then she stood up, smoothed her skirts, and went to see about supper. She found Colt outside, chopping wood with brutal efficiency. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the cooling evening air. He didn't acknowledge her approach, but she knew he'd heard her. "I can cook," Mara said, "if you'll show me where things are kept." He sank the axe into the chopping block and turned to face her. "You don't have to. I'm aware of that, but I'm here to be useful, not ornamental. So please, show me the kitchen." Something that might have been respect crossed his face. "All right." He led her back inside, pointing out the stores of flour and dried beans, the salted meat in the larder, the root vegetables in the cellar. His explanations were brief and practical. "I'm not expecting fancy meals," he said. "Anything hot and filling is enough." Mara rolled up her sleeves. "I'll see what I can do." She made biscuits and gravy, fried salt pork, opened a jar of preserved peaches she found in the pantry. It wasn't sophisticated, but it was competent, the kind of meal that spoke of capability rather than artistry. They ate in silence, seated across from each other at the scarred table. Colt cleaned his plate without comment, which Mara took as approval. "You cook better than I do," he said finally, carrying his plate to the wash basin. "That's not difficult, is it?" The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "I'll clean up," Mara said. You've been working all day. So have you. You traveled. I sat in a stagecoach. You chopped enough wood to last a week. She took his plate firmly. I'll manage. He studied her again with that assessing look. Then he nodded. I'll be outside checking the livestock. Holler if you need anything. After he left, Mara washed the dishes in water heated over the fire, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind raced. This was her life now. This house, this land, this silent man who'd taken her in based on nothing but a letter and some inexplicable impulse he couldn't even explain to himself. She'd told him the truth. She had weathered worse than gossip. The life she'd fled in Philadelphia had been gilded and suffocating, full of rules she couldn't follow and expectations she couldn't meet. Her father's business partner, Mr. Marcus Eldridge, had decided she would make a suitable second wife after his first died. He hadn't asked. He'd simply informed her father, who'd agreed without consulting her. When Mara refused, Eldridge had become insistent, then threatening, then dangerous. She'd seen the advertisement for a frontier wife in a newspaper left at her cousin's house, and something in her had recognized it as an escape route, a door opening in a prison wall. So she'd written the letter, taken her mother's jewelry to sell for passage, and left Philadelphia before dawn on a gray morning, leaving only a note that said she was sorry, but she couldn't stay. Let them call her a coward. Let them say she'd run from duty. She knew the truth. She'd run toward freedom, even if that freedom came with hardship and loneliness and a town full of strangers who wished her gone. She was drying the last plate when she heard horses, multiple riders, approaching fast. Mara set down the dish and moved to the window. Through the gathering darkness, she could see 4 men on horseback pulling up in front of the house. Colt emerged from the barn, his posture tense but controlled. She recognized one of the riders from town, a heavy-set man with a gray beard who'd been standing outside the saloon. "Colt," the man called out, not bothering to dismount. "We need to talk." "Then talk, Sheriff Davis." The sheriff's eyes flicked toward the house, toward the window where Mara stood visible in the lamplight. "Heard you brought that woman out here." "Her name is Mara Ellison, and yes, she's here." "You know anything about her?" "I know what I need to know." "Do you?" The sheriff leaned forward in his saddle. "Because Tom Brennan rode out to the telegraph office this morning, asked his cousin in Philadelphia to check on a Mara Ellison. You want to know what he found?" Colt's expression didn't change, but Mara saw his shoulders tighten imperceptibly. "She's running from scandal," the sheriff continued. "Engagement broken off under mysterious circumstances. Family wants her back. Some business partner of her father's is looking for her." "Is she wanted for a crime?" Colt asked, his voice level. "Well, no, but is there a warrant for her arrest?" "Not exactly, but then her past is her business and mine, not yours." The sheriff's face darkened. "Listen here, Rayner. I know you keep to yourself, and that's fine, but you bring a woman of questionable character into this valley that becomes everybody's business." "She's done nothing wrong." "You don't know that, and you don't know she has." Colt took a step forward. "Unless you've got legal cause to be here, Sheriff, I'll ask you to leave my property." The men behind the sheriff shifted uneasily. One of them, younger, with a cruel mouth, spoke up. "We're just trying to protect this community, Reiner. We don't need your eastern whore bringing trouble." He didn't finish the sentence. Colt moved faster than Mara would have thought possible, crossing the distance and dragging the young man off his horse in one fluid motion. He hit the ground hard, and Colt stood over him, rage controlled but palpable. "You'll watch your mouth," Colt said quietly, "or I'll close it for you." The sheriff held up a hand. "Easy, Colt. Easy now." "Get off my land," Colt said, not moving. "All of you. And if I hear anyone in town repeating slander about Miss Ellison, they'll answer to me." The young man scrambled to his feet, climbing back on his horse with his face red with humiliation and anger. The sheriff gathered his reins. "You're making a mistake, Rayner. Defending her is going to cost you." "That's my choice to make." They rode off into the darkness, and Colt stood in the yard until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. When he came back inside, Mara was sitting at the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" "For bringing this trouble to your door. They were right. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done or why I left. You're defending someone who might not deserve it." Colt pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Are you running from the law? No. Did you hurt anyone? No. Steal anything? No. Then I've heard enough. He stood up. Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. Colt. He turned in the doorway. Why are you doing this? Why defend me against the whole town? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I know what it's like to be judged for the life you left behind, he said finally, and I know what it costs to start over. If you came here looking for that chance, you'll get it. The rest is nobody's business. He left her there, alone with her thoughts and the echo of his words. Mara didn't sleep much that night. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier, wind through the valley, the distant calls of night birds, the settling of the house. Through the thin wall, she could hear Colt moving around in his room, equally restless. She thought about Marcus Eldridge, about his cold eyes and colder threats, about her father, who'd chosen business over his daughter's safety, about Philadelphia society, which would have smiled at her wedding while knowing exactly what kind of man her husband would be. And she thought about the silent rancher on the other side of the wall, who'd faced down armed men to defend her honor without even knowing her story. The next morning, Mara woke before dawn to find Colt already gone. She dressed quickly, pinned her hair back, and went outside. The valley was beautiful in the early light, painted in shades of gold and amber. She found Colt in his barn, feeding the horses. I can help, she said. He looked at her city dress, her impractical shoes. You'll ruin your clothes. Then I'll get different clothes. Show me what needs doing. For the first time since they'd met, Colt smiled. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less haunted. All right then. Let's see what you're made of. He taught her how to muck out stalls, how to check the horses for injuries, how to distribute feed evenly. She worked without complaint, even when her back ached and her hands blistered. By noon, she was covered in dirt and sweat and probably smelled like livestock. She'd never felt more free. You'll need proper work clothes, Colt said over lunch, and boots. We can ride into town tomorrow, get you fitted at the general store. Will that cause more trouble? Probably. He met her eyes. But you live here now. You can't hide forever. I'm not hiding, Mara said firmly. I'm starting over. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Hiding is what you do when you're ashamed. I'm not ashamed of leaving a bad situation. I'm proud of it. Colt studied her with that assessing look she was beginning to recognize. Good, he said finally. You'll need that spine for what's coming. He was right. The next afternoon they rode into Red Hollow together. The town's reaction was immediate and hostile. Conversation stopped when they approached. Women pulled their children closer. Men stared with open suspicion. Martha Green barely looked at Mara as she measured her for work dresses and boots. I'll have these ready in a week, she said coldly. Thank you, Mara replied, refusing to be cowed. At the feed and supply store, the owner, a thin man named Samuel Post, wouldn't even serve them at first. I don't do business with those who bring trouble to Red Hollow, he announced. Then I'll take my business to Blackwater, Colt said calmly, naming a town 20 miles away. And I'll make sure every rancher in the valley knows why. Samuel hesitated. Colt's ranch was one of the most successful in the area. Losing his business would hurt. Fine, Samuel muttered, but I don't like it. Your feelings aren't required, Colt replied. Just the supplies. They loaded the wagon in tense silence, watched by curious and hostile eyes. As they prepared to leave, a woman approached. She was young, perhaps Mara's age, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Miss Ellison, she said quietly. I'm Sarah Chen. My husband and I run the boarding house. I wanted to welcome you to Red Hollow. Mara was so surprised by the kindness that she barely knew how to respond. Thank you. That's very kind. Don't listen to them, Sarah said, low enough that only Mara could hear. They fear anything different, but some of us know better. Sarah! A sharp voice called out. Mrs. Fletcher, the postmistress, stood glaring from across the street. Get away from that woman, now! Sarah's smile faltered, but she squeezed Mara's hand quickly before stepping back. Welcome, she said again, then hurried away. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Colt didn't speak, and Mara was lost in thought. You made an enemy today, she said finally, standing up for me like that. I made enemies the day I came to this valley, Colt replied. One more doesn't change much. Why do they fear you? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I'm not like them. I don't need their approval. Don't need their church or their socials or their way of doing things. That makes me dangerous in their eyes. Is that why you live so far out? Partly. He glanced at her. But mostly because I prefer it. People are complicated. Land is simple. I'm people, Mara pointed out. You are. He turned his attention back to the road. But you're here by choice, not obligation. That makes a difference. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence. Over the following days, they developed a rhythm. Colt taught Mara the work of the ranch, how to milk the cow, collect eggs, tend the vegetable garden he'd let grow wild. She learned to ride horseback, to mend fences, to read weather in the sky. In return, she brought order to the household. She cooked real meals, mended his clothes, organized supplies. She read in the evenings while he worked on his accounts, and sometimes he'd look up to find her watching the fire with an expression he couldn't quite read. They talked more, though never about the past. Colt spoke about the land, teaching her to see the valley the way he did, as something alive and demanding, but fair. If you worked hard and respected its rhythms, it would provide. Mara spoke about books, about ideas, about the wider world she'd left behind. Colt listened with surprising attention, asking questions that revealed a sharp intelligence hidden beneath his rough exterior. You have education, Mara observed one evening, more than you let on. Had a teacher once who believed in me, Colt said, not looking up from the harness he was repairing. Before the war. Seems like a lifetime ago. What changed? His hands stilled. Everything. She didn't push. They both had ghosts they weren't ready to share. Danny, the hired hand, started coming around more regularly. He was a cheerful young man in his early 20s, full of easy smiles and local gossip. Town's still talking about you two, he reported one afternoon, accepting the lemonade Mara offered. But Sarah Chen's been defending you, says Miss Mara was nothing but polite. Sarah seems kind, Mara said. She is. Came here from San Francisco 5 years ago with her husband, Lee. They've had their share of judgment too, being Chinese, but they work hard, mind their business, and slowly folks have come around. Slowly, Mara repeated. That's how it works out here, Danny said. Trust is earned in inches, not miles. That night, Mara asked Colt about it. Does it bother you, being isolated from the community? I chose it, he said simply. Can't complain about a bed you made yourself. But don't you get lonely? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in the air between them. Sometimes, he admitted quietly. Less so lately. Mara felt her breath catch. This was dangerous territory, feelings she hadn't planned for, hadn't wanted. This was supposed to be practical, safe, uncomplicated, but sitting across from this complicated, damaged man in the lamplight, she felt something stirring that was anything but safe. She stood abruptly. I should retire. Early morning tomorrow. Mara, good night, Colt. She fled to her room before he could say more, before she could do something foolish like admit that she wasn't lonely anymore either. The trouble came on a Friday afternoon. Colt and Danny were riding the north pasture, checking fence lines, when they spotted riders in the distance. 5 men, moving with purpose toward the ranch house. That's Tom Brennan's crew from the Double J, Danny said, squinting. What are they doing on our land? Nothing good, Colt said grimly. Come on. They rode hard back to the house, but the men had already arrived. Mara stood on the porch, arms crossed, facing them down with remarkable calm. Tom Brennan sat his horse with casual arrogance. Well, well, the lady of the house. What do you want? Mara asked coldly. Just being neighborly. Thought we'd stop by, see how Colt's doing with his new acquisition. I'm not an acquisition. And you're trespassing. Feisty. Tom grinned at his men. I like that. Bet Colt does too. Must get mighty lonely out here with just a cold bastard like him for company. Colt rode up then, positioning his horse between the men and the porch. Get off my land, Brennan. We're leaving. Tom held up his hands in mock surrender. Just wanted to deliver a message. There's a man looking for Miss Mara here. Asked me to let him know if I heard about a woman matching her description. Mara went very still. Marcus Eldridge, Tom continued, watching her face. Ring a bell? He's offering quite a reward for information on your whereabouts. You told him? Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. Not yet. Thought I'd give you a chance to explain yourself first. What did you do, lady? Steal from him? Break his heart? That's enough, Colt said. His voice was quiet, but something in it made Tom's horse sidestep nervously. He's coming here, Rayner, to Red Hollow. Says Miss Mara is his fiancée, that she's not well, that her family is worried sick. He'll be here within the week. She's not going anywhere, Colt said. That's not your decision to make, friend. It's my ranch, my land. She's under my protection. That makes it exactly my decision. Tom's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. When Eldridge arrives, and he will arrive, the whole town's going to see what kind of woman you've shacked up with. A liar. A runaway. Maybe worse. Out. Now. The men rode off, but their laughter echoed back across the valley. Mara sank down on the porch steps, her face pale. Danny discreetly made himself scarce, heading to the barn. Colt sat beside her. Tell me about Eldridge. He is my father's business partner. After his wife died, he decided I would be her replacement. He didn't ask. He simply assumed. Her hands were shaking. When I refused, he became insistent, then threatening. He said he'd ruin my father's business if I didn't cooperate. My father... She swallowed hard. My father said it was my duty to secure the family's future. So you ran. So I ran. She looked at him. I know how it sounds. Irresponsible. Selfish. It sounds like survival, Colt said. Same as any other. He'll come here. He'll tell everyone I'm promised to him. That I stole money. My mother's jewelry, which was mine by right, but he won't see it that way. He'll make me look like a criminal. Let him come, Colt said quietly. You're not alone anymore. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. You don't owe me this. I've brought you nothing but trouble. That's not true. He turned to face her fully. You've made this place feel less empty, made me remember what it's like to have someone to talk to care about. He paused. I won't let him take you, not if you don't want to go. I don't, she said fiercely. I'd rather die than go back to that life. Then you'll stay. He stood, offering his hand. Come on, we've got work to do before dark. She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. But she didn't let go immediately, and neither did he. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then released her hand and walked toward the barn, leaving Mara standing on the porch, terrified and grateful, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. That night, Colt made plans. He rode into town the next morning, going straight to the sheriff's office. Davis looked up in surprise when he walked in. Rayner, what brings you here? I want it on record that Mara Ellison is here of her own free will, Colt said, and that she's not engaged to Marcus Eldridge or anyone else. If he claims otherwise, he's lying. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. That's her word against his. Then let it be on record. This is going to get ugly, Colt. It already is. Colt leaned on the desk. I'm not asking for your help, Sheriff. I'm telling you how it is. Mara stays unless she chooses otherwise. Anyone who tries to force her off my property will be dealt with. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. Colt left before Davis could respond. His next stop was Sarah Chen's boarding house. She answered the door with flour on her hands and surprise in her eyes. Mr. Rayner, is something wrong? I need a favor, he said. When Marcus Eldridge arrives, and he will arrive, I need you to pay attention. Watch how people react to him. Listen to what he says. Can you do that? Sarah studied him thoughtfully. You think he's lying about Miss Mara? I know he is. Then yes, I'll watch, and I'll tell you what I see. Thank you. Back at the ranch, Mara was working in the garden, her new work dress already dirty at the hem, her hair coming loose from its pins. She looked up when she heard his horse. How did it go? As well as could be expected. He dismounted, coming to stand at the garden's edge. The sheriff won't help, but he won't stop us either. Sarah Chen's on our side. Our side, Mara repeated softly. When did this become an us? Colt met her eyes. The day I let you off that stage. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, neither was quite ready to examine. I should tell you, Mara said, looking down at the earth, that I'm not good at trusting people, at letting them close. Neither am I. Then we're a fine pair, aren't we? She managed a weak smile. Could be worse, Colt said. Then so quietly she almost missed it. Could be better too, if we let it. Before she could respond, Danny came running from the barn. Riders coming! 3 of them! Colt tensed, hand moving automatically to the rifle on his saddle. But as the riders approached, he recognized them, ranchers from farther down the valley, Sam Tucker, Jonas Webb, and old Henry Morrison. They pulled up in the yard, and Sam raised a hand in greeting. Colt, Miss Mara. Sam, what brings you out this way? The 3 men exchanged glances. Then Jonas spoke up. Heard there might be trouble coming. Thought you should know you're not alone if it does. Colt stared at them. Why? Because we remember what it was like when we were new here, Henry said, his weathered face serious. Remember how hard folks made it. Some of us don't forget that. And because, Sam added, you're a good neighbor, Colt, fair and honest. If you say Miss Mara's here by choice and deserves respect, that's good enough for us. Mara felt something crack open in her chest. Hope, maybe? Or just relief that they weren't entirely alone. Thank you, she said, her voice thick. That means more than you know. The men nodded, clearly uncomfortable with emotion. We'll be around, Jonas said. Anything happens, you send Danny to fetch us. After they left, Mara turned to Colt. Why did they do that? Because not everyone in this valley is like Tom Brennan, he said. Some people remember what it's like to need help, and because they respect you. He shrugged. Maybe. Definitely. She stepped closer. You've built more than a ranch here, Colt, whether you meant to or not. He looked uncomfortable with the observation. I just work hard and mind my business. Sometimes that's enough. They stood in the golden afternoon light, 2 people slowly learning to trust, to hope, to believe that maybe they weren't as alone as they'd thought. The week that followed was strange. They worked together, ate together, talked more freely. But underneath it all was the waiting, for Marcus Eldridge, for confrontation, for the moment when Mara's past would collide with her present. Colt caught himself watching her more often. The way she moved through the house with growing confidence. The way she laughed at Danny's jokes. The way she looked at the valley in the evening light, like she was memorizing something precious. He told himself this was just an arrangement, practical, simple. But somewhere along the way, Mara Ellison had stopped being a stranger and started being... He didn't finish the thought. Couldn't afford to. Not yet. Mara felt it too, the shifting ground between them. She found excuses to be near him, to brush against his shoulder while cooking, to catch his eye across the table. She told herself it was just gratitude, just relief at having found safety. But in the quiet moments before sleep, she admitted the truth. She was falling for this silent, complicated man who'd defended her without question, who'd stood between her and a hostile world. It terrified her. The night before everything changed, they sat on the porch together, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. If he comes, Mara said quietly, and if he convinces the town that I'm what he says I am, you could lose everything, your reputation, your peace, maybe even your livelihood, if people stop doing business with you. I know. Then why? Colt was quiet for a long time. You know what the worst part of being alone is? It's not the silence. It's the slow realization that maybe you deserve it. That maybe you're alone because you're not worth anyone's time or care. He looked at her then. You made me remember that I'm more than just the work I do. More than my past. You didn't judge me. Didn't ask me to be different. You just were. And that changed something. Mara's eyes burned with tears. I was so scared when I came here. Terrified of what I'd find. But you... She shook her head. You've been kinder than anyone I left behind. Braver. More honest. Mara shun. No, let me finish. She turned to face him fully. Whatever happens tomorrow, or next week, or next month, I want you to know that coming here, choosing this, choosing you, it's the best decision I've ever made. The space between them felt electric, charged with everything unsaid. Colt reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his rough fingers gentle against her skin. I'm not good at this, he said quietly. At feelings. At words. You're better than you think. They sat there in the darkness, hands finding each other, fingers intertwining, two broken people learning that maybe broken things could still fit together, could still make something whole. Whatever comes, Colt said, we face it together. Together, Mara echoed. And somewhere in the valley below, a stranger rode toward Red Hollow, carrying lies and demands and the power to destroy everything they were building. But in that moment, on the porch under the stars, Mara and Colt had something stronger than lies. They had choice. They had each other, and they had the stubborn determination to fight for the life they were creating, one difficult day at a time. The storm was coming, but they would weather it together. Marcus Eldridge arrived in Red Hollow on a Tuesday morning, stepping off the stagecoach like a man who owned the world and was merely visiting the less fortunate parts of it. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that must have cost more than most ranchers earned in a year. His silver hair was swept back from a high forehead, and his eyes, pale blue and cold as winter ice, surveyed the dusty street with barely concealed contempt. Beatrice Fletcher saw him first from the post office window and immediately bustled outside, drawn like a moth to flame by the promise of gossip and drama. "Welcome to Red Hollow," she called out, hurrying across the street. "Can I help you find something?" Eldridge turned that icy gaze on her, and she actually took a step back. "I'm looking for a woman named Mara Ellison. I understand she's been staying here." "Oh my!" Beatrice pressed a hand to her chest. "You must be Mr. Eldridge. Tom Brennan said you might be coming. I'm Beatrice Fletcher, the postmistress. Such a terrible situation, just terrible." "Indeed," Eldridge's mouth tightened. "Where might I find Miss Ellison?" "She's at Colt Rayner's ranch, about 3 miles north. But, sir, I should warn you, Mr. Rayner has been quite protective of her, claims she's there by choice." "Of course he does." Eldridge's voice dripped with disdain. "Men like that always claim innocence when they take advantage of vulnerable women. Where might I find the local sheriff?" Beatrice pointed eagerly toward the sheriff's office. "Right down there. Sheriff Davis is a good man. He'll help you sort this out." "I'm certain he will." Within an hour, half the town knew Marcus Eldridge had arrived, and the other half was finding out. People gathered in clusters, whispering behind hands, constructing narratives from fragments and speculation. "He looks like a gentleman," Martha Green observed to a cluster of women outside her store. "Refined, educated, not like—" She didn't finish, but everyone knew what she meant. Not like Colt Rayner. At the Silver Dollar Saloon, Tom Brennan held court with a whiskey in hand. "Told you she was trouble. That woman's been lying to Rayner from the start. Probably stole money, maybe worse. Eldridge will set things straight." But at the boarding house, Sarah Chen watched through the window as Eldridge spoke with Sheriff Davis, and something about the man's demeanor made her uneasy. She'd seen men like him in San Francisco, men who wore civility like a mask but had cruelty underneath. She sent her husband Lee to ride out to Colt's ranch with a warning. Lee found Colt and Danny mending fence in the south pasture. "He's here," Lee said without preamble. "The man from Mara's past. Arrived this morning." Colt's hands stilled on the wire. "What's he doing?" "Talking to the sheriff. Talking to anyone who'll listen. He's smooth, Colt. Makes himself sound reasonable. Makes Mara sound like a confused girl who needs rescuing." "She's not a girl," Colt said quietly. "And she doesn't need rescuing." "I know that. Sarah knows that. But he's convincing. People want to believe him because it makes a better story than the truth." Colt looked toward the house, where he could see Mara hanging laundry in the yard, her movements efficient and calm. She didn't know yet. He'd have to tell her. "Thank you for the warning," Lee nodded. "Sarah says to watch yourself. Men like Eldridge don't fight fair." After Lee left, Colt rode back to the house. Mara looked up as he approached, and the smile on her face faded when she saw his expression. "He's here," she said. Not a question. "He's here." She set down the laundry basket, her hands trembling slightly. "What do we do?" "We don't do anything. You stay here. I'll handle—" "No." Her voice was firm. "I won't hide while you face him alone. This is my fight, Colt. He's dangerous. I know exactly how dangerous he is." She moved closer. That's why I ran. But I'm done running. If he wants to spread lies about me, he can do it to my face." Colt studied her, seeing the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw. This was the woman who'd traveled alone across the country, who'd chosen uncertainty over safety, who'd faced down Tom Brennan and his crew without flinching. She was stronger than anyone gave her credit for, including herself. "All right," he said finally. "But we do this together. Agreed?" "Agreed." They didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, a formal delegation arrived at the ranch. Sheriff Davis led the way, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Behind him rode Marcus Eldridge, Tom Brennan, and Reverend Thomas. A handful of townspeople followed at a distance, eager to witness the confrontation. Colt and Mara stood together on the porch, presenting a united front. Eldridge's eyes found Mara immediately, and his expression shifted, a carefully calibrated mixture of relief and concern that would have been convincing if Mara hadn't known better. "Mara, my dear," he said, dismounting with practiced grace. "Thank heavens, your father has been beside himself with worry." "I doubt that very much," Mara replied coolly, "since I left him a note explaining exactly why I was leaving." Eldridge's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes. "You weren't well when you left. Confused, overwhelmed by our engagement plans. It's understandable." "We were never engaged," Mara cut him off. "You announced an engagement I never agreed to." "Your father gave his blessing." "My father sold me like cattle to protect his business interests. That's not the same thing." Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Sheriff Davis shifted in his saddle. "Miss Ellison," he said carefully, "Mr. Eldridge has shown me correspondence from your father requesting your return. He's concerned about your welfare." "My welfare?" Mara's laugh was sharp. "My father didn't care about my welfare when he promised me to a man 30 years my senior without my consent. He didn't care when I told him I'd rather die than marry Marcus Eldridge. He cared about business contracts and social standing and nothing else." "You're speaking from emotion," Eldridge said smoothly, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Colt's hands curl into fists. "Perfectly natural for a woman of your temperament. But darling, you must see how this looks. Running off to marry a stranger." He glanced at Colt with barely disguised contempt. "A rough frontiersman you met through some advertisement. Your father is willing to forgive this indiscretion if you'll just come home." "This isn't an indiscretion," Colt said, his voice low and dangerous. "And she's not going anywhere." "I'm speaking to my fiancée," Eldridge replied sharply. "Not to you." "She's not your fiancée. She's told you that clearly." "And who are you exactly? A hired hand who saw an opportunity? A lonely man who took advantage of a confused woman?" Eldridge's voice rose, playing to the crowd. "I've made inquiries about you, Mr. Rayner. You have quite a mysterious past yourself. No one seems to know where you came from or why you hide out here away from decent society." "My past is my business." "Not when you're harboring someone else's intended bride." "I'm not anyone's property." Mara's voice cracked like a whip. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "I'm a grown woman who made a choice. I chose to leave Philadelphia. I chose to answer that advertisement. I chose to come here and build a new life. Those were my decisions, not influenced by anyone else." "Mara, please." Eldridge's tone turned pleading, but his eyes remained cold. "I know he's convinced you of some romantic notion about frontier freedom, but look at this place. Look at what you've reduced yourself to. Hanging laundry, working like a common servant. You were meant for better than this." "I was meant to be free," Mara shot back, "something you never understood." Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. "Miss Ellison, I have to ask, did Mr. Rayner or anyone else coerce you into coming here or staying here?" "No." "And you came here of your own free will?" "Completely." "And you wish to remain here?" "Absolutely." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then I'm not sure what else can be done, Mr. Eldridge." The lady's made her position clear. "Her position?" Eldridge's mask slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "She's not in her right mind. Anyone can see that. Look at her. She's been here, what, 3 weeks? And she's already dressed like a field hand, isolated from proper society, under the influence of a man with no reputation or standing." "Watch your mouth," Colt warned. "Or what? You'll threaten me like you threatened Tom and his men? Like you've been threatening anyone who questions your motives? Eldridge turned to the crowd. This man is keeping Mara here against her better judgment, poisoning her mind against her family and her rightful place in society. Can't you see that? I can see a man who won't take no for an answer, Sarah Chen's voice rang out from the crowd. She'd positioned herself prominently, Lee beside her. I've watched Miss Mara in town. She's polite, capable, and clear-headed. She doesn't act like someone being coerced. And what would you know about it? Eldridge sneered. You're hardly a reliable judge of... Careful, Colt's voice cut through like a blade. Finish that sentence and we'll have a different kind of problem. The two men locked eyes, and the tension crackled like lightning about to strike. Reverend Thomas stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. Perhaps we could all take a moment to... I want to show you something, Mara interrupted. She disappeared into the house and returned moments later with a bundle of papers. These are letters my father wrote to me over the past year. Would you like me to read them to everyone, so they can hear how he described his arrangement with Mr. Eldridge? How he told me my feelings on the matter were irrelevant, how he threatened to disown me if I didn't comply. Eldridge's expression hardened. Those are private correspondence. They're proof, Mara countered, proof that I didn't run away from a loving family concerned for my welfare. I escaped from men who viewed me as a commodity to be traded. She turned to the sheriff. Mr. Eldridge claims to want what's best for me, but what he really wants is to salvage his pride and his business deal. I embarrassed him by leaving, made him look foolish in Philadelphia society. This isn't about my welfare, it's about his reputation. Lies, Eldridge hissed. She's been coached by Rayner to say these things. I don't need coaching to tell the truth, Mara shot back. Enough. Sheriff Davis held up a hand. Mr. Eldridge, I appreciate your concern, but the law is clear. Miss Ellison is an adult woman, not wanted for any crime. She's stated clearly and repeatedly that she's here by choice. Unless you can provide evidence of coercion or criminal activity, there's nothing I can do. This is outrageous. Eldridge's composure finally cracked completely. I've traveled hundreds of miles, spent considerable resources trying to rescue this foolish woman from her own mistakes, and you're telling me... I'm telling you that she's made her choice, Davis said firmly, and that choice is the law. Eldridge's face flushed with rage. He turned back to Mara, and all pretense of concern vanished. You'll regret this. When this rough life breaks you, when winter comes and reality sets in, when he tires of you, and he will tire of you, you'll have nowhere to go. Your father won't take you back. Philadelphia society will never accept you. You'll be ruined, Mara, completely ruined. Then I'll be ruined on my own terms, Mara replied steadily. Better that than owned by you. For a moment, Eldridge looked like he might physically lunge at her. Colt shifted position, placing himself slightly in front of Mara, and the movement was enough to make Eldridge pause. You haven't heard the last of this, Eldridge said coldly. He turned to the crowd. All of you should know, this woman stole valuable jewelry when she left Philadelphia. Family heirlooms worth thousands of dollars. She's a thief as well as a runaway. The jewelry belonged to my mother, Mara said. She left it to me in her will. I have the documentation. Convenient that you have papers to support your claims. As convenient as your sudden concern for my welfare, Mara countered. Eldridge remounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. I'll be staying in town for a few days. When you come to your senses, Mara, you know where to find me, but don't wait too long. My patience has limits. He rode off, Tom Brennan following with a satisfied smirk. The rest of the crowd dispersed slowly, whispering among themselves. Sheriff Davis lingered. That was well done, Miss Ellison, but he's right about one thing. This isn't over. Men like Eldridge don't give up easily. Neither do I, Mara replied. After everyone left, Colt and Mara stood in the yard, the afternoon sun beating down on them. You were magnificent, Colt said quietly. Mara's hands were shaking now that the confrontation was over. I was terrified. Didn't show. I wanted to run. Every instinct told me to run. But you didn't. He took her hand, steadying her trembling fingers with his own rough palm. You stood your ground, faced him down in front of the whole town. We faced him down, she corrected. I couldn't have done it without you beside me. They stood there, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. He'll try something else, Mara said after a moment. He didn't come all this way just to give up after one conversation. I know. Colt's jaw tightened. We need to be careful. Watch for... The gunshot cracked through the air, and both of them hit the ground instinctively. When the echo faded, they looked up to see Danny running from the barn, pointing toward the north ridge. Someone shot at the cattle. They're scattering. Colt was on his feet instantly. How many head? Can't tell yet, but they're running toward the canyon. If the cattle made it into the canyon, they'd be scattered across miles of rough country. It would take weeks to round them up, and some would be lost entirely. It would devastate the ranch's finances. This is Eldridge, Mara breathed. He's sabotaging you. Maybe. Colt was already moving toward the barn. Danny, get the horses saddled. Mara, stay in the house. Colt, please. He stopped, looking back at her. I need to know you're safe. I can't focus if I'm worrying about you. She wanted to argue, but she saw the fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. Be careful. He nodded and was gone. Mara went inside, but she couldn't sit still. She paced the main room, listening to the distant sounds of men shouting, horses galloping, more gunshots in the distance. An hour passed. Then another. Finally, she heard horses returning. She rushed to the porch to see Colt and Danny riding in, looking exhausted and frustrated. We got most of them turned before they reached the canyon, Colt said, dismounting heavily. But we lost about 20 head, and someone cut the fence in 3 places. Did you see who did it? No. They were long gone by the time we got there. He pulled off his hat, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. But I found this. He held up a silver watch, expensive and engraved. Even from a distance, Mara could read the initials, M.E. He wants us to know it was him, she said. He wants us to know he can hurt us. It's more than that. Colt's expression was grim. He's setting me up, making it look like I'm losing control of my ranch, like I can't protect what's mine. Trying to prove to the town that you're a distraction, a liability. Then we need to prove him wrong. Over the next 3 days, the situation escalated. Someone poisoned the water in the north well, forcing Colt to dig a new one. Feed bags were slashed in the barn, spilling grain everywhere. Fences were cut repeatedly, requiring constant repair. And through it all, Marcus Eldridge maintained a visible presence in Red Hollow, playing the concerned gentleman with masterful precision. He took a room at Sarah Chen's boarding house, much to her dismay. He attended church on Sunday, sitting in the front pew and nodding along to Reverend Thomas's sermon. He bought drinks at the Silver Dollar Saloon, commiserating with the local ranchers about the difficulties of frontier life. That poor man, Beatrice Fletcher sighed to Martha Green. He just wants to help Mara, and she's too stubborn to see it. Women can be foolish about men, Martha agreed, especially when they're lonely. But not everyone was convinced. Sam Tucker, Jonas Webb, and Henry Morrison made a point of riding out to Colt's ranch to help repair fences and round up scattered cattle. They didn't say much, but their presence spoke volumes. Sarah Chen refused to serve Eldridge breakfast one morning, citing a sudden shortage of eggs. When he complained, she smiled sweetly and suggested he try the boarding house in Blackwater. Even Danny's normally cheerful demeanor had darkened. Something ain't right about that man, he muttered to Colt. The way he talks about Miss Mara, like she's a horse that got away from him. The breaking point came on Saturday night. Eldridge hosted a gathering at the saloon, buying drinks for anyone who'd join him. Most of the town showed up, drawn by free whiskey and curiosity. He stood at the bar, his voice carrying across the crowded room. I don't blame Colt Rayner entirely, he said, his tone reasonable and thoughtful. A man alone for too long sees a pretty woman and loses his good judgment. It's natural, really, but what's happening out at that ranch? It's not right. What do you mean? Tom Brennan prompted, right on cue. I mean that Mara was raised in society, educated, cultured, and now she's out there working like a field hand, isolated from civilization, living with a man she barely knows in an arrangement that's barely respectable. He shook his head sadly. It breaks my heart to see what she's been reduced to. She seems happy enough when we see her in town, Sarah Chen interjected from across the room. Eldridge turned that cold smile on her. Abused women often defend their abusers, Mrs. Chen. Surely you know that. The room went silent. That's a serious accusation, Sheriff Davis said carefully. Is it an accusation if it's true? Eldridge spread his hands. I'm not saying Rayner beats her. I'm saying he's isolated her, made her dependent on him, convinced her that she has nowhere else to go. That's a different kind of abuse, but it's abuse nonetheless. That's a damn lie. Sam Tucker stood up from his table. I've seen those two together. Rayner treats her with nothing but respect. Of course you defend him. You're his friend. Eldridge's voice remained calm, reasonable. But ask yourselves, what kind of man advertises for a wife? What kind of man takes in a woman he's never met? A desperate man, a man who can't find a woman willing to have him through normal means. And what kind of man chases a woman halfway across the country when she's made it clear she doesn't want him? Jonas Webb added. Eldridge's expression hardened. A man who honors his commitments, a man who respects the agreements made between families, a man who understands that women sometimes need protection from their own impulsive decisions. Women aren't children, Sarah said sharply. We're capable of making our own choices. Are we talking about women in general, Mrs. Chen, or about you specifically? Eldridge's smile turned cruel. I understand you made an unconventional choice yourself, marrying outside your race. Tell me, do you ever regret it? Ever wish someone had stopped you from making such a scandalous decision? Li Chen stood up, his chair scraping loudly. You need to watch your mouth. The saloon erupted in competing voices, some defending Eldridge, some defending the Chens, everyone taking sides in an argument that had been building since Mara first arrived. In the chaos, no one noticed a young boy slip out the door and run toward the edge of town, where he'd left a horse waiting. At the ranch, Colt and Mara were finishing dinner when they heard hoofbeats approaching fast. The boy, Michael, Sarah Chen's nephew, practically fell off his horse in his haste. Mr. Rayner, Miss Mara, you need to come quick. What's wrong? Colt was already moving toward the door. Mr. Eldridge is at the saloon telling everyone that Miss Mara is being kept against her will, that you've isolated her and manipulated her. Half the town believes him. Aunt Sarah sent me to warn you. She thinks they might try to come out here, maybe try to take Miss Mara back to town for her own protection. Mara felt ice slide down her spine. They're going to take me away from here? Not if I have anything to say about it, Colt said grimly. He turned to Michael. Ride to Sam Tucker's place. Tell him what's happening. Tell him we might need help. After Michael left, Colt began checking his rifles, his movements efficient and controlled. You're preparing for a fight, Mara said. I'm preparing to defend what's mine. He looked up, meeting her eyes. You're not going back to him, Mara. Not tonight, not ever. I don't care who I have to face to make that clear. This is exactly what he wants, Mara said, pacing the room. He's trying to force a confrontation, make you look violent and unstable. Give the town a reason to side with him. Then what do you suggest? Mara stopped pacing, an idea forming. We go to them. What? We go into town, face them directly. Not in secret, not in confrontation, but openly. I'll speak to the whole town, tell them my story in my own words. Let them see me, really see me, and decide for themselves if I'm a woman being manipulated or a woman making her own choices. Colt frowned. That's risky. If the crowd turns against you, then at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll have spoken my truth. She moved closer to him. You've been fighting my battles for me, Colt. Defending me, protecting me. And I'm grateful. But maybe it's time I fight my own battle. He studied her face, seeing the determination there, the courage. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. They rode into Red Hollow together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of fire. The saloon was still crowded when they arrived, the argument ongoing. Conversation stopped as Colt and Mara walked through the door together. Eldridge stood at the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His eyes narrowed when he saw them. Mara, how kind of you to join us. I heard you've been telling stories about me, Mara said, her voice clear and steady. I thought I should tell my own. She moved to the center of the room, and the crowd shifted to watch her. Colt positioned himself near the door, ready for anything. You all know why I'm here, Mara began. I answered an advertisement and came west to marry a stranger. To many of you, that makes me desperate or foolish or both. And maybe you're right, but I want you to understand why. She paused, gathering her courage. In Philadelphia, I was promised to this man, she gestured to Eldridge, without my consent. My father made a business arrangement that included me as part of the bargain. When I refused, I was told my wishes didn't matter, that it was my duty to accept. Your duty to your family, Eldridge interjected. Your duty to honor the commitments your father made. My father sold me, Mara said bluntly. Let's not pretend it was anything else. And when I said no, Mr. Eldridge made it clear that refusal wasn't an option. He threatened my father's business. He threatened my reputation. He made it clear that one way or another I would be his. That's a gross mischaracterization. Is it? Mara turned to face him directly. Then tell these people the truth. Tell them that you're 30 years older than me. Tell them that your first wife died under mysterious circumstances that were never fully explained. Tell them that you've been engaged 3 times before, and each time the woman broke it off and left the city entirely. Eldridge's face flushed red. You have no proof of... I have letters, Mara cut him off, from your previous fiancés. They reached out to me, tried to warn me. I kept them. She pulled folded papers from her pocket. Would you like me to read them, or would you prefer to leave quietly? The saloon had gone completely silent. You're bluffing, Eldridge said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mara unfolded one of the letters. This is from Catherine Morrison, dated 1873. Dear Miss Ellison, I'm writing to warn you about Marcus Eldridge. I was once engaged to him, and I thought him a gentleman until we were alone. He became possessive, controlling, and when I tried to end the engagement, he threatened to ruin my family's reputation. I fled Philadelphia and have never regretted it, though he spent months trying to find me. She looked up. Would you like me to read the others? Eldridge's composure cracked entirely. Those letters are forgeries. She's lying to turn you against me. Can't you see that? Then why did you chase her all the way out here? Sarah Chen asked. If she means so little to you, why spend the money and time? Because I care about her. No, Mara said quietly. You care about winning, about not being told no, about proving that you can have whatever you want, regardless of what anyone else wishes. She turned back to the crowd. I came west because it was the only escape I could find. I answered Colt Rayner's advertisement because I needed safety, and he offered it without conditions or demands. And yes, our arrangement is unconventional, but it's also honest. She found Colt's eyes across the room. He's never lied to me, never tried to manipulate or control me. He's given me space to heal, to find myself again. He's defended me when I couldn't defend myself, and supported me when I found the strength to stand on my own. That's more than anyone in my old life ever did. How touching, Eldridge sneered. But speeches don't change facts. You belong in Philadelphia with your family. I belong to myself, Mara's voice rang out. That's what you've never understood. I'm not property to be traded or claimed. I'm a person with the right to choose my own life. Even if that choice is wrong? Even then, because they're my mistakes to make. Sheriff Davis stepped forward. Mr. Eldridge, I think it's time you moved along. The lady's made herself clear. This is ridiculous. You're all going to stand here and let her throw her life away on some rough frontiersman. Better a rough frontiersman who respects her than a polished gentleman who sees her as property, Sam Tucker said firmly. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Not everyone. Beatrice Fletcher still looked disapproving, and Tom Brennan wore a smirk. But enough. Enough to matter. Eldridge looked around the room, seeing his support crumbling, his face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, all of you. When she brings scandal and ruin to this pathetic little town, get out. Colt's voice was quiet but absolute. Leave Red Hollow, tonight. Or what? You'll threaten me, attack me, prove that you're exactly the violent brute I said you were? Colt didn't move, didn't react. He simply stood there, and something in his stillness was more intimidating than any threat could have been. Eldridge grabbed his coat. Fine, I'm leaving, but this isn't over, Mara. Your father will hear about this. Philadelphia society will know what you've become. You'll never be able to return. I know, Mara said. I'm counting on it. Eldridge stormed out, and the tension in the room broke like a fever. Mara swayed slightly, and Colt was there instantly, his hand at her elbow. You all right? I think so. She looked up at him. Did that really just happen? It did, and you were incredible. Sarah Chen pushed through the crowd, pulling Mara into a fierce hug. That took more courage than I've seen in years. Other people approached. Not everyone, but enough. Offering tentative words of support, apologizing for believing Eldridge's lies. But as they left the saloon and started back toward the ranch, Mara felt the adrenaline drain away, leaving her shaking and exhausted. "He'll find another way to hurt us," she said quietly as they rode through the darkness. "Men like him always do." "Let him try," Colt replied. "We're ready this time." They reached the ranch to find Sam Tucker, Jonas Webb, and Henry Morrison waiting in the yard, rifles ready. "Thought you might need backup," Sam said with a grin. "Eldridge left town," Colt told them. "But thank you for everything." After the other ranchers left, Colt and Mara stood on the porch, watching the stars emerge. "You changed everything tonight," Colt said. "Stood up in front of the whole town and claimed your right to choose. That took more strength than most people have." "I learned it from you," Mara replied. "You've been showing me how to be strong since I arrived." He turned to face her fully. "Mara, I need to tell you something." "What?" "This started as an arrangement, practical, simple, but somewhere along the way," he paused, searching for words. "You've become more than just someone I'm helping, more than a partner. You've become essential," Mara finished softly. "I know, because that's what you've become to me." They stood inches apart, the space between them charged with everything unspoken. "I don't know how to do this," Colt admitted. "How to care about someone again. How to let them close." "Neither do I," Mara said. "But maybe we can figure it out together." He reached up slowly, cupping her face in his rough palm. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "whatever Eldridge tries, whatever the town thinks, we face it together." "Together," she agreed. And then he kissed her, gentle and fierce and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Mara rested her forehead against his. "I choose you," she whispered. "I choose this life, this place, this future. Not because I'm desperate or manipulated, but because it's what I want. You're what I want." "Then you've got me," Colt replied, "for as long as you'll have me." They stayed there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, two broken people who'd found something neither had thought they deserved. A second chance at happiness, built on honesty and choice, and the stubborn determination to create something good from the wreckage of their pasts. The storm hadn't passed completely. Eldridge's threats still hung in the air, and the town's acceptance was fragile at best. But for the first time since Mara had stepped off that stagecoach, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because someone had given her permission, but because she'd claimed it for herself. And that made all the difference. 3 days after Marcus Eldridge left Red Hollow, the first fire started. Colt woke to the smell of smoke and Danny's shouts echoing across the valley. He was out of bed and pulling on his boots before his eyes had fully focused, muscle memory from the war taking over. Mara appeared in her doorway wrapped in a shawl, her face pale in the pre-dawn darkness. "Stay inside," Colt ordered, grabbing his rifle from above the door. "What's happening?" "Don't know yet. Just stay inside until I call for you." He ran outside to find the hay barn engulfed in flames, orange light dancing against the black sky. Danny was already there with buckets, but it was clear the structure was lost. The real danger was the wind carrying embers toward the house and the other outbuildings. "Get the horses out of the stable," Colt shouted. "I'll wet down the roof." They worked frantically, leading panicked horses to the far pasture, throwing bucket after bucket of water onto the house and stable roofs. Mara appeared despite his orders, her nightgown soaked through as she hauled water from the well with desperate efficiency. "I told you to stay inside, and I'm choosing not to listen," she shot back, her face streaked with ash and sweat. "You need help." There was no time to argue. They formed a chain, Mara filling buckets, Danny running them to Colt, who climbed onto roofs and threw water wherever embers landed. The work was brutal, exhausting, terrifying. By the time the sun rose, the hay barn was a smoking ruin, but they'd saved everything else. The three of them collapsed in the yard, covered in soot and ash, coughing and shaking from exertion and fear. "How did it start?" Mara asked between coughs. Colt walked slowly around the remains of the barn, studying the ground. Near the back corner, he found what he was looking for, a broken oil lamp deliberately placed. "This was no accident," he said grimly, holding up the shattered glass. "Eldridge," Danny spat. "Has to be." He left town 3 days ago. Sheriff Davis saw him get on the stage himself. Then he hired someone, Mara said, her voice hollow. Someone local who'd be willing to do his dirty work. Colt's jaw tightened. Tom Brennan. They rode into Red Hollow that afternoon, all three of them still smelling of smoke, faces hardened with anger and determination. Colt went straight to the sheriff's office while Mara and Danny waited outside. Sheriff Davis looked up from his desk, his expression troubled. Heard about your barn. Real sorry, Colt. It was arson. I found the lamp that started it. You sure? Colt set the broken pieces on the desk. Someone placed this in my barn in the middle of the night. Either Eldridge doubled back or he paid someone to finish what he started. Davis sighed heavily. I'll investigate, but without witnesses or proof of who actually did it. Talk to Tom Brennan. He's been Eldridge's ally from the start. Find out where he was last night. On what grounds? A hunch? Colt, I sympathize, but I can't just accuse a man. My livelihood is being destroyed piece by piece. Colt's voice was dangerously quiet. My cattle scattered, my fences cut, my barn burned. How much more has to happen before you take this seriously? I am taking it seriously, but I need evidence, not suspicion. Colt stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out without another word. Outside, Mara touched his arm gently. What did he say? Nothing useful. Colt looked down the street toward the Silver Dollar Saloon where Tom Brennan's horse was tied. But I'm going to get answers anyway. Colt, don't. But he was already walking, his stride purposeful and dangerous. Mara and Danny hurried after him. The saloon went quiet when Colt pushed through the doors. Tom Brennan sat at his usual table, cards in hand, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him. He looked up with a lazy smile. Well, well, heard you had some trouble out at your place, Rayner. Shame about that barn. Colt crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed Tom by the front of his shirt, hauling him out of his chair and slamming him against the wall. Cards scattered across the floor. Where were you last night? Get your hands off me! Where were you? Tom's companions started to rise, but something in Colt's expression made them hesitate. I was right here, Tom sneered. Ask anyone. Was here till past midnight, then went home and slept like a baby. Liar. Charlie, Tom called out to the bartender. Tell him. I was here all night, wasn't I? Charlie West wiped a glass slowly, his face uncomfortable. He was here till closing, Colt. I saw him myself. Colt's grip tightened. Then who'd you pay to do it? Who'd you send to burn my barn? I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you just got careless with a lantern. Happens all the time on ranches, especially when a man's distracted by other things. His eyes slid toward Mara, who stood in the doorway. Or by other people. Colt's fist connected with Tom's jaw before anyone could react. The impact sent Tom sprawling across the table, scattering bottles and glasses. Colt! Mara's voice cut through the sudden chaos. Tom came up with blood on his lip and rage in his eyes. You're going to regret that, Rayner. I already regret not doing it sooner. Sheriff Davis burst through the door, drawn by the commotion. What in blazes is going on here? Rayner just assaulted me for no reason, Tom shouted, wiping blood from his mouth. Came in here making wild accusations, then attacked me. Is that true, Colt? Colt's hands were still clenched into fists. He knows something about the fire. I'm sure of it. And I've got a dozen witnesses who'll say I was nowhere near your ranch last night, Tom shot back. But you just attacked me in front of half the town. Sheriff, I want him arrested. Now hold on. Arrest him, or I'll file formal charges. My family's got lawyers, Davis. Good ones. Rayner can't just go around beating on people because he's paranoid. Davis looked between the two men, clearly torn. Colt, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. You're arresting me? I'm taking you in for questioning, cooling you off before this gets worse. This is ridiculous, Mara stepped forward. Mr. Brennan has been antagonizing us since I arrived. He's been working with Marcus Eldridge. Do you have proof of that, Miss Ellison? Davis asked wearily. Everyone saw them together. Everyone knows. Knowing and proving are different things. Now please, let me handle this before someone else gets hurt. Colt met Mara's eyes across the room. She saw frustration there, and anger, but also resignation. He knew fighting would only make things worse. I'll come quietly, he said. But this isn't over, Brennan. Sounds like a threat to me, Tom said smugly. You all heard that, right? He's threatening me. As Davis led Colt out, Mara felt rage boiling in her chest. This was exactly what Eldridge had wanted. Chaos, discord, Colt painted as the violent aggressor while the real criminals hid behind alibis and lies. Danny touched her elbow gently. We should go, Miss Mara. Nothing more we can do here right now. But Mara wasn't ready to leave. She walked deliberately to Tom Brennan's table, her eyes blazing. You think you're clever, she said quietly. You think you've won something, but I know the truth, and sooner or later everyone else will too. Tom leaned back in his chair, his expression mocking. The truth that you're a runaway who's brought nothing but trouble to this valley? That Rayner's so blinded by a pretty face he's lost all sense? Yeah, I think people already know that truth. The truth, Mara continued as if he hadn't spoken, is that you're a small man doing a rich man's dirty work for a few dollars. That makes you not just cruel, but cheap. Tom's smirk faltered. And when this is over, Mara finished, when everyone sees what you've done, you'll have to live in this town knowing that everyone knows what you are. That's going to be worse than any punishment the law could give you. She turned and walked out, leaving silence in her wake. At the sheriff's office, Colt sat in the small holding cell, his mind racing. He'd let his temper get the better of him, played right into their hands. Now he was locked up while whoever had burned his barn was free to strike again. Sheriff Davis sat at his desk, filling out paperwork. I'm not charging you with anything yet, Colt, but you need to calm down. Can't have you beating on people, no matter what you think they've done. So I'm supposed to just sit back and watch my ranch get destroyed? You're supposed to let the law handle it. The law isn't handling it. You said yourself you can't do anything without proof. Davis set down his pen. I know you're frustrated. I know this looks bad, but vigilante justice isn't the answer. It never is. Then what is? Before Davis could answer, the door burst open and Sarah Chen rushed in, her face flushed and urgent. Sheriff, you need to come quick. There's been another fire, the Webb's place this time. Their grain storage is burning. Davis was on his feet immediately. When? Just now. Jonas sent his boy for help. Davis grabbed his hat, then looked at Colt in the cell. He made a decision. You stay here. Don't make me regret this. He left without locking the cell door. Colt sat there for a moment in the empty office, then stood and walked out. By the time he reached the Webb's ranch, half the valley seemed to be there. The grain storage was engulfed in flames, and people were forming bucket lines, trying desperately to keep the fire from spreading to the house and barn. Colt joined the line without a word, working alongside neighbors who hours before had watched him be taken away by the sheriff. There was no time for judgment now, only survival. Jonas Webb worked frantically, his face streaked with tears and ash. 10 years of grain, he kept saying. 10 years gone. Colt found Sheriff Davis in the chaos. Same as mine? Davis nodded grimly. Found lamp fragments. Someone's targeting ranchers who've been friendly to you and Miss Mara. This is a warning. They're showing us what happens to anyone who takes our side. I know, and I'm going to... Davis stopped, staring at something across the fire line. Colt followed his gaze. In the crowd of onlookers, partially hidden in the shadows, stood a young man Colt didn't recognize. But there was something about the way he was watching the fire, not with horror or sympathy, but with satisfaction. Who's that? Colt asked. Frank Carson, drifter who's been working odd jobs around town. Showed up about a week ago. Davis's eyes narrowed. Right around when Eldridge arrived. They moved through the crowd carefully, not wanting to spook their quarry. But Frank must have sensed something because he suddenly turned and started walking quickly toward his horse. Hey, Davis called out. I need to talk to you. Frank broke into a run. Colt was faster. He caught the young man before he reached his horse, tackling him to the ground. They struggled briefly, but Colt had size, strength, and motivation on his side. He pinned Frank face down in the dirt. Davis arrived with his pistol drawn. Frank Carson, you're under arrest. Don't bother denying it. We both saw you running. I didn't do nothing. I was just leaving. In the middle of a fire? That's suspicious timing. Davis pulled Frank to his feet and began searching him. In the man's jacket pocket, he found a leather pouch heavy with coins. This is more money than you'd make in 6 months of odd jobs. Where'd it come from? Frank's face went pale. I earned it. Doing what? Just work, around town. Colt grabbed the pouch and opened it. Inside were gold coins, Eastern money, expensive and rare in frontier towns. Where did you get this? I told you, I earned. Who paid you to burn those barns? Colt's voice was ice. Was it Eldridge? Did he hire you before he left town? I don't know what you're talking about. Davis took the pouch, examining the coins. These are Philadelphia mint. Fresh, too. And you just happen to have them while 2 ranches mysteriously catch fire in 2 days? The crowd had gathered now, watching with intense interest. Jonas Webb pushed forward, his face dark with rage. Did you burn my grain storage? Answer me! Frank looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him and seemed to realize he was trapped. I want a lawyer. Nearest lawyer's in Blackwater, Davis said. That's a 2-day ride. You'll have plenty of time to think about whether you want to talk before we get there. He started leading Frank toward his horse. Colt, I'm going to need you to come too. You're a witness to his flight, and I might need help if he tries something stupid. Mara appeared at Colt's side, having ridden over from town when she heard about the second fire. What's happening? They caught someone. The man who set the fires. Colt's expression was grim but satisfied. He's carrying Philadelphia gold coins. Understanding dawned in Mara's eyes. Eldridge paid him before leaving town, set everything up so he'd be long gone when the destruction started. Looks that way. But we still can't prove Eldridge gave the order, Mara said quietly. This man could deny ever meeting him. Colt met her gaze. Then we need to make him talk. The ride to Blackwater took 2 days, as predicted. Davis, Colt, and a deputized Sam Tucker made the journey with Frank Carson, bound and sullen. They made camp the first night in a clearing well off the main road. As they sat around the fire, Davis tried questioning their prisoner again. This'll go easier if you cooperate, Frank. Tell us who hired you, and I'll make sure the judge knows you helped. Frank stared into the flames, saying nothing. You're young, Davis continued, maybe 22, 23? You've got your whole life ahead of you, but arson is serious. People could have died in those fires. You'll hang for this unless you give us something. Still nothing. Colt stood and walked to where Frank sat tied to a tree. He crouched down to eye level. Let me tell you how this plays out. You keep quiet, you hang. Eldridge gets away clean because there's no proof connecting him to you. He goes back to Philadelphia, forgets you ever existed, and you die alone. Frank's jaw tightened. Or, Colt continued, you tell the truth. You testify that Marcus Eldridge hired you to burn those barns. He goes to prison, and you get a lighter sentence. Maybe even clemency eventually. And if Eldridge has friends in high places, Frank said bitterly, if his lawyers make sure my testimony doesn't matter, then I've betrayed him for nothing, and I'm still dead. So he did hire you. Frank's eyes widened as he realized his mistake. I didn't say that. You just did. Colt stood. Sheriff, I think our prisoner just confessed. Davis smiled grimly. I think you're right. Frank slumped against the tree, defeat written across his face. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Eldridge isn't just some rich man from back east. He's got connections. Powerful people who owe him favors. You think catching me changes anything? He'll just find someone else. Or he'll come himself next time and finish what he started. Let him try, Colt said. We'll be ready. The next day, they reached Blackwater and turned Frank over to the local authorities. The sheriff there, a grizzled man named William Grant, listened to their story with growing interest. Marcus Eldridge, you say? Philadelphia businessman. You know him? Davis asked. Know of him. Had a wanted poster come through here about 6 months back. Woman named Catherine Morrison filed charges against him for threatening her and her family. But the charges were dropped before any arrest could be made. Apparently, Eldridge's lawyers made the whole thing disappear. Colt and Davis exchanged glances. Catherine Morrison, the same woman whose letter Mara had read in the saloon. Do you still have that poster? Colt asked. Grant rummaged through files and produced a yellowed paper. The description matched Eldridge perfectly, and the charges listed were extensive. Intimidation, stalking, threatening behavior. Can we get a copy of this? Davis asked. Take the original. Case is dead anyway, but it might help you build yours. On the ride back to Red Hollow, Colt felt something he hadn't experienced in days. Hope. They had Frank Carson's confession. They had evidence of Eldridge's pattern of behavior. They had proof. But when they rode into town 2 days later, Mara was waiting with news that shattered that hope entirely. She met them at the edge of town, her face pale and drawn. "Colt, something's happened." "What's wrong?" "The ranch. Someone came while you were gone. They—" She swallowed hard. "They killed the livestock. All of it. The chickens, the remaining cattle, everything." Colt felt the world tilt. Everything? Danny found them this morning. They'd been poisoned. He's been trying to salvage what he can, but tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. We tried to watch for trouble, but whoever did it must have come in the middle of the night." The ranch that Colt had built over 5 years of backbreaking work. The foundation of his livelihood, his future. Gone. Sam Tucker rode up beside them. "I'll get some men together. We'll help you rebuild the herd." "With what money?" Colt's voice was hollow. "That livestock represented everything I had. Without them, I can't make payments on the land, can't buy feed for new animals, can't—" He couldn't finish. The weight of it was too much. Mara dismounted and went to him, taking his hands in hers. "We'll figure it out. Together, remember?" "There's nothing to figure out. Eldridge won. He destroyed everything." "No," Mara said fiercely. "He destroyed property, animals, things that can be replaced. He didn't destroy us. We're still here, still standing. That means he hasn't won." "Mara, without the ranch? Without the ranch, we start over. We find another way, but we don't give up." She gripped his hands tighter. "I didn't come all this way, didn't fight this hard to watch you surrender now." Colt looked into her eyes and saw the same stubborn determination that had brought her west in the first place. The same courage that had made her stand up to Eldridge in front of the whole town. "I don't know how to start over," he admitted quietly. "Neither do I, but we'll learn together." Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. "We've got Frank Carson's confession and evidence of Eldridge's past crimes. I'm going to send telegrams to Philadelphia, get the authorities there involved. Even with his connections, this is too much to ignore." "And in the meantime?" Colt asked. "In the meantime, you watch your back and you don't give up." That night, Colt and Mara stood in the ruins of what had been his dream. Dead animals lay scattered across the property. The burned barn was a blackened skeleton against the stars. Everything he'd worked for, reduced to ashes and bones. "I brought this on you," Mara said quietly. "If I hadn't come here—" "Don't." Colt's voice was firm. "You didn't do this. Eldridge did. And I'd rather have you here and everything else gone than have the ranch and be alone." Mara turned to face him. "You mean that?" "I mean it." He pulled her close. "You asked me once why I let you come. Why I didn't send that telegram telling you to stay away. I think I know now." "Why?" "Because some part of me knew I needed you. Needed someone who understood what it meant to start over. To build something from nothing." He rested his forehead against hers. "We can do it again. Build something better this time." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." They stood there in the darkness, two people who'd lost everything holding on to each other like lifelines. The next morning, Danny arrived early with unexpected news. "Miss Mara, Mr. Rayner, there's people coming, a lot of people." They went outside to see a line of wagons approaching from town. Sarah and Lee Chen led the way, followed by Sam Tucker, Jonas Webb, Henry Morrison, and at least a dozen other families from the valley. The wagons were loaded with supplies, lumber, tools, food, even some livestock. Sarah climbed down first, her smile warm but determined. "We heard what happened. We're here to help." "We can't accept—" Colt started. "You can and you will," Jonas interrupted. "You helped me fight my fire. You've been a good neighbor to all of us. Now let us be good neighbors back." Sam Tucker gestured to the wagons. "We've got enough lumber to rebuild your barn, enough supplies to last you through winter, and we've all agreed to pool resources to help you rebuild your herd come spring." "Why?" Colt's voice was rough with emotion. "Why would you do this?" "Because that's what communities do," Henry Morrison said simply. "We take care of our own, and you're one of us, whether you've always believed it or not." Mara felt tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. All of you. We can't ever repay—" "Don't need repaying," Sarah said, hugging her. "Just need you to stay, both of you. This valley needs people with your kind of courage." Over the following weeks, the valley came together in a way Colt had never experienced. Men worked from dawn to dusk, rebuilding the barn, stronger and better than before. Women brought food and supplies, stayed to help clean and organize. Children played in the yard, bringing life and noise to a place that had been too quiet for too long. Even people who'd been hostile before softened. Martha Green donated fabric for new curtains and blankets. Reverend Thomas held a special collection to help with costs. Beatrice Fletcher, grudgingly, contributed to the supply fund. Not everyone helped. Tom Brennan and his crew stayed conspicuously absent, but their silence spoke volumes, and the community noticed. One evening, as the sun set over a valley finally beginning to heal, Sheriff Davis rode out with a telegram in hand. "News from Philadelphia," he announced. "The authorities there have issued a warrant for Marcus Eldridge's arrest. Seems once Frank Carson started talking, other victims came forward. Catherine Morrison, 2 other former fiancés, even some business partners claiming fraud. Eldridge is facing multiple charges." "Will he face trial?" Mara asked. "His lawyers will fight it, but with this much evidence piling up, even his connections might not save him." Davis handed Colt the telegram. "There's more. Your father sent a message through official channels." Mara's breath caught. "What did he say?" "He apologized. Said he was wrong to force the engagement, wrong to choose business over your safety. He's terminated his partnership with Eldridge and wants to know if you'd be willing to communicate with him again." Mara took the telegram with shaking hands, reading her father's words. They were formal, stiff, but underneath the awkward phrasing she could sense genuine remorse. "I don't know if I can forgive him yet," she said quietly, "but maybe someday." "That's enough for now," Colt said, his arm around her shoulders. As the weeks turned to months, Red Hollow settled into a new normal. The ranch was rebuilt, not exactly as it had been, but stronger. The community that had once been fractured by suspicion was bound together by the shared experience of crisis and recovery. Colt and Mara set a wedding date, a real wedding, not just a legal arrangement. They'd have it in the spring, Sarah insisted, when the valley was green and hopeful. "Though we all know you're already married in every way that matters," Sarah added with a knowing smile. One cold December evening, Colt and Mara sat on their rebuilt porch, wrapped in blankets and watching snow begin to fall. "Do you ever regret it?" Colt asked. "Coming here, choosing this life?" Mara considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain it caused, the destruction, the fear. But choosing you? Choosing this?" She shook her head. "Never. Not for a single moment. Even though you lost everything from your old life? I lost things that were never really mine, possessions. A life that was chosen for me rather than by me." She turned to face him. "But I gained something real, something worth fighting for." "What's that?" "Freedom, choice, love." She smiled. "You." Colt pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the valley into something clean and new. The past would always be there, scars on the land and in their hearts. Marcus Eldridge would face trial, though his ultimate fate remained uncertain. Tom Brennan and his allies still harbored resentment, though they kept it quiet now. The town's full acceptance was still a work in progress, but none of that diminished what Colt and Mara had built together. A partnership forged in crisis, tested by fire, and proven strong enough to withstand whatever storms might come. They'd started as strangers bound by desperate circumstance. They'd survived attempted sabotage, arson, social ostracism, and the systematic destruction of their livelihood. They'd faced down their demons, his isolation, her fear, and chosen each other anyway. As the snow fell heavier, covering the valley in white, Mara rested her head on Colt's shoulder. "Ready for whatever comes next?" she asked. "With you?" "Always." And in the quiet of that winter evening, with a rebuilt ranch behind them and an uncertain but hopeful future ahead, 2 broken people who dared to choose each other prepared to face the rest of their lives together. Stronger, braver, and more certain than ever that love built on truth and choice could survive anything. The snow that had seemed so peaceful that December evening turned brutal by January. Winter came down on the valley like a hammer, bringing temperatures that froze water in the well and winds that cut through every layer of clothing. The rebuilt barn held strong, But the challenge of surviving the season tested everything Colt and Mara had built together. They woke one morning to find 3 feet of snow had fallen overnight, blocking the door and burying the pathways between buildings. Danny couldn't make it out from town, leaving just the two of them to manage the animals and keep the fires burning. "We need to dig out the chicken coop," Mara said, pulling on her heaviest coat. "They won't survive another day without fresh water." "I'll do it. You stay inside where it's warm." "Colt Rayner, we've been through this. I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting from hard work." She wrapped a scarf around her face. "We do this together, remember?" He couldn't argue with that. They'd made it their philosophy, their promise to each other. Together. They spent the morning shoveling paths through snow that came up to Mara's waist, breaking ice in troughs, carrying feed to animals huddled miserably in the cold. By noon, Mara's hands were numb despite her gloves, and Colt's breath came in harsh gasps that froze in his beard. "This is impossible," Mara said, leaning on her shovel. "How do people survive winters like this?" "One day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time." Colt looked at the sky, reading weather signs she was still learning. "There's more coming. We need to bring in extra firewood while we can." They worked until darkness fell, then stumbled inside exhausted and half-frozen. Mara prepared a simple stew while Colt built up the fire and they ate in silence, too tired for conversation. That night, huddled under every blanket they owned, Mara shivered despite the fire roaring in the hearth. "Come here," Colt said, pulling her against him. "Share body heat. It's the only way." She pressed close to his warmth, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear. "Tell me we're going to make it through this winter. We're going to make it through this winter." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've survived worse. And because I've got something to survive for now." His arms tightened around her. "You." The storm raged for 3 days. They were completely isolated, cut off from town and any help. The constant work of keeping animals alive and the house warm left them exhausted, but there was no choice but to continue. On the second night, one of the new calves they'd received from the community got sick. Colt found it lying in the barn, shivering and refusing to stand. "It's not going to make it," he said grimly. "Too young, too weak for this cold. There has to be something we can do." Mara knelt beside the calf, running her hands over its trembling body. "Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes you lose things no matter how hard you fight." But Mara refused to accept that. She'd come too far, fought too hard, to surrender to inevitability now. "Help me get it inside." "Inside the house?" "Yes. If it stays out here, it dies. We both know that." Colt stared at her for a moment, then shook his head with something that might have been admiration. "You're either brilliant or crazy. Can't I be both?" They carried the calf into the house, laying it on old blankets near the fire. Mara heated water and tried to get the animal to drink, while Colt rigged up a makeshift pen to keep it contained. "This is insane," Colt muttered, but he was smiling. "This is survival," Mara corrected. "You taught me that." They took turns through the night, watching the calf, coaxing it to drink, keeping it warm. By morning, it was standing on shaky legs, butting its head against Mara's hand in search of more food. "It's going to make it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Colt watched her feed the calf, this Eastern woman who'd arrived in impractical dresses and had transformed into someone who'd fight a blizzard to save a dying animal. "You never cease to amaze me." "Good. I'd hate to become predictable." When the storm finally broke, Danny arrived with news that sent a chill through Mara that had nothing to do with the weather. "There's talk in town," he said, stamping snow off his boots. "Tom Brennan's been spreading stories again. Says the only reason you two survived the winter is because Miss Mara used money she stole from Eldridge. Says she's got a fortune hidden somewhere and has been lying about it all along." "That's ridiculous," Mara said. "I came here with nothing but a carpet bag and my mother's jewelry, which I already explained." "I know that, and most folks know that too. But Tom's persistent. He's got some people wondering." Danny looked uncomfortable. "There's also talk about, well, about the arrangement between you two. Some folks think it's not proper, you living here all these months without being married yet." "The wedding is set for spring," Colt said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I know. I'm just telling you what's being said. Martha Green mentioned it to Sarah, and Sarah thought you should know." After Danny left, Mara paced the room, her earlier triumph over the calf forgotten in the face of this new threat. He won't stop. Tom Brennan won't stop until he destroys us. Then maybe it's time we stopped waiting for him to make the next move. What do you mean? Colt stood, his expression thoughtful. We've been defensive this whole time, reacting to what Eldridge and Brennan throw at us. Maybe we need to go on the offensive. How? By getting married. Now. This week. Mara stared at him. But we planned for spring. Sarah's been organizing, so Sarah will understand. The question is, do you want to wait? Give Brennan and anyone else who doubts us more ammunition, or do you want to stand up in front of the whole valley and make this official, end the speculation once and for all? Mara's heart raced. She'd imagined their wedding as a celebration, a joyful ceremony when the weather was warm and the valley green. But Colt was right. Waiting gave their enemies time to undermine them further. Yes, she said firmly. Let's do it. Let's get married and dare anyone to question us after that. The news spread through Red Hollow like wildfire. Some people were supportive, excited by the unexpected romance of a winter wedding. Others were skeptical, seeing it as a desperate move to legitimize an improper arrangement. Sarah Chen threw herself into preparations with characteristic enthusiasm. We'll hold it at the community hall. I'll handle the food. Don't argue. You know I'm better at cooking for crowds anyway. Martha Green is donating fabric for a dress if you want one. I don't need anything fancy, Mara protested. Every bride deserves to feel beautiful on her wedding day. Even frontier brides marrying stubborn ranchers in the middle of winter. Sarah squeezed her hand. Let us do this for you. Please. The day before the wedding, Mara's father's response to her last letter arrived. She opened it with trembling hands, Colt standing supportively beside her. The letter was longer than his previous correspondence and more personal. He wrote about his regrets, about how he'd let business concerns override his duty as a father. He described the scandal that had erupted in Philadelphia when Eldridge's crimes came to light, how families who'd once supported the man now pretended they'd never trusted him. But it was the final paragraph that made Mara's eyes fill with tears. I cannot undo my mistakes, Mara. I cannot give you back the security and happiness I took from you. But I can tell you that I'm proud of your courage. You did what I lacked the strength to do. You chose your own path, regardless of the cost. I hope someday you might find it in your heart to forgive me. Until then, please know that wherever you are, whatever you've chosen, you have my blessing and my love. Your father, he's trying, Colt said gently, reading over her shoulder. I know. I don't know if trying is enough. It's a start. That's all anyone can ask for. Mara folded the letter carefully. I wish my mother was here. She'd know what to say about all this. What would she think of me? Colt asked. Rough rancher with more scars than charm? Mara smiled through her tears. She'd think you were exactly what I needed. She always said the best marriages weren't about matching social standing or meeting expectations. They were about finding someone who made you braver than you were alone. Am I that for you? Every single day. The morning of the wedding arrived cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue against fresh snow. Mara dressed in the room that had been hers, but would now be theirs, her hands shaking as she buttoned the simple cream-colored dress Sarah had made. Sarah had outdone herself. The dress was beautiful without being elaborate, perfectly suited to a frontier wedding. It had delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, and the fabric draped in a way that made Mara feel elegant despite the practical warmth of its design. You look beautiful, Sarah said, pinning Mara's hair up with combs she'd brought from San Francisco. Colt's not going to know what hit him. I'm terrified, Mara admitted. Good. That means it matters. Sarah met her eyes in the mirror. I was terrified when I married Lee. My family back in San Francisco had disowned me for choosing a Chinese husband. I had no idea if we'd survive the prejudice, the hardship, but I knew I loved him, and that was enough. How did you know? That it was worth it? Because even on the hardest days, I'd rather be struggling with him than comfortable without him. Sarah squeezed her shoulders. That's how you know. The community hall was packed when they arrived. It seemed like everyone in the valley had come, filling the benches and spilling out the doors. Some faces were friendly. Sam Tucker and his family, Jonas Webb and his wife, Henry Morrison, grinning from the front row. Others were neutral, waiting to pass judgment. Tom Brennan stood in the back, his expression dark and hostile. Beside him were a handful of men who'd been his allies throughout everything. Colt saw them, but didn't react, his focus entirely on Mara as she walked toward him. Reverend Thomas stood at the front, his weathered face kind despite his earlier reservations. He'd come around after seeing how Colt and Mara had handled the crisis, how the community had rallied around them. "We gather here today," he began, his voice carrying through the crowded hall, "to witness the union of Colt Reiner and Mara Ellison. Marriage is a sacred bond, a commitment not just between two people, but between them and the community that supports them." He spoke about partnership, about choosing each other every day, about building something lasting from the foundation of trust and respect. His words were simple but profound, and Mara felt tears prick her eyes. When it came time for vows, Colt took her hands in his. His palms were rough and warm, familiar now after months of working side by side. "I'm not good with words," he said, his deep voice quiet but clear. "Never have been. But I can promise you this. I'll stand beside you every day we have. I'll defend you, support you, and never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. You chose freedom over security when you came here. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice." Mara's voice trembled as she spoke her own vows. "I came here running from one life and stumbled into another. You gave me safety when I needed it most, but more than that, you gave me respect. You treated me like a partner, not property, like a person with choices, not a problem to be solved. I choose you, Colt Reiner. Not because I'm desperate or confused, but because you're the best man I've ever known, and I'll spend my life being worthy of the faith you had in me." "Then by the power vested in me," Reverend Thomas said, smiling, "I pronounce you husband and wife. Colt, you may kiss your bride." Colt pulled Mara close and kissed her in front of the entire valley, and the hall erupted in applause and cheers that drowned out any whispers of disapproval. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Red Hollow had seen in years. Sarah had prepared a feast with help from half the women in town. There was music, fiddles and guitars, and even a harmonica, and dancing that went on for hours. Colt, who'd claimed he couldn't dance, waltzed Mara around the floor with surprising grace. "You lied about not being able to dance," she accused, laughing. "I said I wasn't good at it, never said I couldn't do it at all. What other secrets are you hiding? You've got a lifetime to find out." As the evening wore on, people came to offer congratulations. Even some who'd been skeptical seemed genuinely happy for them. Martha Green hugged Mara with unexpected warmth. "You've proven me wrong, my dear. I'm glad of it." But Tom Brennan and his allies left early, their departure noted by everyone. As they walked out, Tom called back loudly, "Enjoy it while it lasts, Reiner. Winter's not over yet." The threat hung in the air, dampening the celebration for a moment. But Colt simply pulled Mara closer and kept dancing, refusing to let Brennan's poison touch their joy. They returned to the ranch late that night, exhausted and happy. Colt carried Mara over the threshold, a tradition he'd claimed was silly but insisted on anyway. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reiner," he said, setting her down gently. "It's been my home for months. This just makes it official. Does it feel different, being married instead of just staying here?" Mara considered the question. "Yes, because now when people question why I'm here, I can tell them it's because I chose this. I chose you. And no one can argue with that." They stood together in the house that had become theirs, looking at how far they'd come from that awkward first day when she'd stepped off the stagecoach into his uncertain care. "Thank you," Mara said softly. "For what?" "For taking a chance on a desperate woman who answered an advertisement, for defending me when you barely knew me, for teaching me that I was stronger than I thought." "You taught yourself that. I just gave you space to figure it out." They moved through the house together, banking the fire, checking that everything was secure for the night. The comfortable domesticity of it felt profound after everything they'd survived to reach this moment. In bed that night, wrapped in each other's arms, Mara felt a peace she'd never experienced before. Not the absence of problems. Tom Brennan's threat still loomed, and winter had months left to test them, but the certainty that whatever came, they'd face it together. "I love you," she said into the darkness. It was the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud. Colt's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. Probably have since you stood up to Eldridge in that saloon and told the whole town they could judge you, but you weren't backing down. That's a very specific moment. It was when I realized you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for, including yourself. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the wind outside and the crackle of the dying fire. The next morning, they woke to find a note pinned to their door. The handwriting was crude, the message uglier. Enjoy playing house while you can. This valley doesn't need your kind. Leave before you're forced out. It wasn't signed, but they knew who'd sent it. Colt crumpled the note, his jaw tight with anger. I'm tired of his games. What are we going to do? We're going to finish what we started. Show everyone that we're not going anywhere. Over the following weeks, Tom Brennan's campaign of intimidation escalated. Small things at first, tools going missing, gates left open so livestock could wander. Then larger acts, a fence section burned, supplies damaged. But something had shifted in the valley, where before people had been hesitant to take sides, the wedding seemed to have drawn a line. Those who'd been neutral started speaking up, defending Colt and Mara, calling out the sabotage. Jonas Webb caught Tom's men cutting fence on his property one night and ran them off with a shotgun. Sam Tucker started organizing patrols, ranchers taking turns watching each other's land. We're not letting them destroy what we've built here, Sam told Colt. This valley's supposed to be about hard work and fair dealing. What Brennan's doing goes against everything we stand for. The confrontation came in early February at the general store. Tom was there with two of his men, buying supplies, when Colt and Mara walked in. The tension was immediate and palpable. Well, well, Tom sneered, the happy couple. Tell me, Raynor, does your wife know she married a man who can't even protect his own property? Watch your mouth, Brennan. Or what? You'll hit me again? Go ahead. Prove to everyone that you're exactly the violent brute I've been saying you are. Colt's hands clenched, but Mara stepped forward before he could respond. Mr. Brennan, she said, her voice clear and steady, I've been trying to understand why you hate us so much. Is it because Colt refused to be intimidated by you? Because I chose my own husband instead of accepting the one chosen for me? Or is it simpler than that? Are you just a bitter man who can't stand to see others happy? Tom's face flushed. You think you're so clever, don't you? Coming here with your fancy words and Eastern airs, acting like you belong. I do belong because I've worked for it. I've earned my place here through every fence mended, every animal tended, every winter day survived. What have you earned, Mr. Brennan, besides the reputation as the man who does Marcus Eldridge's dirty work? The store had gone silent. Other customers watched with rapt attention. You don't know what you're talking about, Tom hissed. Don't I? You took money from Eldridge, everyone knows it. You've been sabotaging us on his orders, or maybe just because he gave you permission to indulge your own cruelty. Mara stepped closer, fearless. But here's what you don't understand. Every time you attack us, you make us stronger. Every time you try to drive us apart, you bind us closer together. You've already lost, Mr. Brennan. You just haven't accepted it yet. Tom raised his hand as if to strike her, and Colt moved like lightning, catching his wrist in an iron grip. Touch her, Colt said, his voice deadly quiet. And I'll break every bone in your hand. Sheriff Davis appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. That's enough. Tom, I think you need to come with me. For what? I haven't done anything. For questioning about the fires, the fence cutting, the sabotage that's been plaguing this valley all winter. I've got witnesses now, people who've seen you and your men where you shouldn't have been. Tom looked around wildly and seemed to realize the tide had turned completely against him. The store's other occupants stared at him with open hostility. This isn't over, he spat, but the threat rang hollow. Yes, Mara said firmly. It is. Davis led Tom out, and the store erupted in conversation. Martha Green came from behind her counter and hugged Mara impulsively. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, she said. Standing up to him like that? I learned from the best, Mara replied, looking at Colt. That evening, as they drove the wagon home through snow that was finally beginning to melt, Colt reached over and took Mara's hand. You didn't need me back there. You handled Brennan yourself. I did need you, just not to fight my battle for me. I needed you to be there, to have my back if things went wrong. That's what partnership means, right? Right. They rode in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the valley that had tested them, broken them down, and rebuilt them stronger. We're going to make it, Mara said. Not a question this time. We already have, Colt replied. Everything from here is just building on the foundation we've laid. At the ranch, they found an unexpected visitor waiting. A well-dressed man stood beside a fine horse, looking distinctly out of place in the frontier setting. Can I help you? Colt called out, immediately wary. The man turned and Mara gasped. Despite the years and the gray in his hair, she recognized her father. Hello, Mara, Richard Ellison said quietly. I hope I'm not intruding. I had to see for myself that you were all right. Mara climbed down from the wagon slowly, her heart pounding. Colt stayed close, protective, but letting her take the lead. How did you find me? Sheriff Davis sent word when you got married. He thought I should know. Her father looked at the ranch, the rebuilt barn, the hard-won signs of survival and persistence. I wanted to meet the man who did what I should have done, protected you, respected your choices, gave you the freedom I denied. He turned to Colt, extending his hand. Mr. Rayner, thank you for taking care of my daughter when I failed to. Colt shook his hand warily. Mara takes care of herself. I just gave her space to do it. Richard smiled sadly. That's more than I ever did. He looked back at Mara. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that Eldridge is in prison. Multiple charges, multiple victims coming forward. He'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. Good, Mara said simply. And I wanted to give you this. He pulled an envelope from his coat. It's the deed to your mother's house, the one she inherited from her family. It's yours by right. It's been sitting empty since she died, but it's worth a considerable sum if you choose to sell it. Or you could keep it, have something in Philadelphia if you ever want to return. Mara took the envelope with trembling hands. I won't return. This is my home now. I understand, but the choice should be yours to make. He glanced at Colt again. I can see you're well cared for. I can see you're happy. That's all any father should want for his daughter. You should have wanted it when it mattered, Mara said, and there was steel in her voice. When I came to you, begged you not to force me into that engagement, you chose money over me. I know, and I'll regret it until my dying day. I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I understand. Richard's eyes were sad but accepting. But know that I'm proud of you, of your courage, of the life you've built here. He mounted his horse, preparing to leave. Mara watched him, feeling a confusion of emotions. Anger, grief, a tiny flicker of something that might someday become forgiveness. Father, she called out as he started to ride away. He turned back. Thank you. For coming. For trying. It's the least I could do, and the most I can offer. He tipped his hat. Take care of yourself, Mara. And Mr. Rayner, take care of her. Always, Colt promised. They watched him ride away, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Are you all right? Colt asked. I think so. It's strange. I spent so long being angry at him, and now that he's here apologizing, I just feel tired. You don't have to forgive him just because he showed up. I know, but maybe someday I will. Not for him, but for me. So I can finally let go of all that anger and hurt. Colt pulled her close. We've got time. No rush on any of it. Inside, they opened the envelope together. The deed was there, along with a bank draft for a substantial sum. Her father's way of providing the security he'd failed to give her when it mattered most. This changes things, Mara said, staring at the numbers. We could rebuild the herd completely, expand the ranch, maybe even hire more help. It's your money, your decision. Mara looked around the house they'd made together, thinking about everything they'd survived to reach this moment. Our money, our decision. That's what marriage means, right? Right. They sat together by the fire, making plans for the future, dreaming about what they could build with this unexpected windfall, combined with the strength they'd earned through hardship. Outside, the last snow of winter began to melt, and in the valley beyond, Red Hollow settled into a peace hard-won and deeply valued. The community that had once rejected Mara now accepted her, not because she'd proven herself by their standards, but because she'd proven that their standards needed changing. And in the ranch house that had become a home, two people who'd started as strangers bound by desperation ended the day as partners bound by love, respect, and the unshakable certainty that they were exactly where they belonged, together. Spring came to the valley like a promise kept. The snow melted in rushing streams down the hillsides, revealing earth that had been hidden for months. Green shoots pushed through the thawing ground, and the air lost its bitter edge, turning soft and alive with possibility. Mara stood on the porch, watching the transformation, her hand resting unconsciously on her stomach, where new life was just beginning to make itself known. She hadn't told Colt yet. She wanted to be certain, wanted to choose the right moment, but the knowledge filled her with a joy so fierce it was almost frightening. They'd survived so much: poverty, sabotage, isolation, the brutal winter. Now they were about to face the greatest challenge and gift of all. Colt came around the corner of the barn leading a new mare, one of several horses they'd purchased with the money from her father. The herd was growing again, stronger and more diverse than before. Danny worked alongside him, and they'd hired 2 more hands, young men from town who'd proven trustworthy during the winter troubles. "What are you thinking about?" Colt called out, seeing her lost in thought. "Everything, nothing, the future." He tied the mare and walked over, climbing the porch steps to stand beside her. "That's a lot of thinking for one morning." "We've earned the right to think about the future, haven't we? To plan beyond just surviving?" "I suppose we have." He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the valley wake from its winter sleep. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Sheriff Davis rode up with a stranger, a well-dressed man with an official bearing that set Mara's instincts on edge. "Morning, Colt, Mara," Davis called out, dismounting. "This is Marshal Thomas Webb from the Territorial Office. He's got news about the Eldridge case." The marshal stepped forward, removing his hat. "Mrs. Rayner, Mr. Rayner, I wanted to inform you personally that Marcus Eldridge has been convicted on multiple charges. He received a sentence of 20 years in the Territorial Prison. With his age and health, it's unlikely he'll ever be released." Mara felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. "It's really over?" "The criminal case is over. However, there's a civil matter." The marshal pulled papers from his saddlebag. "Eldridge's assets have been seized to pay restitution to his victims. You're listed as one of them, Mrs. Rayner. The court has awarded you a sum of $5,000 in damages for his harassment and the costs his actions imposed on you." Mara's knees went weak. Colt steadied her, his face shocked. $5,000? She repeated. "It's a fraction of what he stole and extorted over the years, but it's what could be recovered. The money's being held in trust in Blackwater. You can claim it any time." The marshal handed her the papers. "I'm also authorized to inform you that Tom Brennan has been charged as Eldridge's accomplice. He's awaiting trial for arson and conspiracy." "About time," Colt muttered. "Brennan's singing like a canary, trying to reduce his sentence," Davis added. "He's admitted to everything, the fires, the sabotage, even admitted Eldridge paid him before leaving town to make sure the Eastern woman learned her place. Those were his exact words." The marshal nodded. "His testimony has helped build cases against 2 other men Eldridge employed for similar purposes in other territories. You've done more than save yourselves. You've helped stop a pattern of abuse that's been going on for years." After the marshal and sheriff left, Colt and Mara sat on the porch steps, the legal papers between them, trying to process what had just happened. $10,000 total, Mara said, adding the inheritance from her mother's property to the restitution. "We could do anything. Go anywhere. Do you want to go somewhere else?" She looked at the valley spread before them, the rebuilt barn, the growing herd, the garden plot she'd been planning where vegetables would grow in a few months. She thought of Sarah Chen's friendship, of the community that had rallied around them, of the life they'd built from nothing. "No," she said firmly. "I want to stay right here. I want to build something that lasts." "What did you have in mind?" Mara took a deep breath. This was the moment. "I want to expand the ranch. Maybe buy some of the land to the east, the section Henry Morrison's been trying to sell. I want to build a real future here." She paused. "For us. And for our child." Colt went very still. "Our child?" "I'm pregnant. About 2 months, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you." He turned to face her fully, his expression cycling through shock, joy, fear, and wonder in rapid succession. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. Sarah helped me figure it out. She had her suspicions." "And you want this? Want to raise a child out here in this rough country?" I want to raise our child wherever we are. And yes, this is rough country, but it's also honest country. Our child will grow up knowing that their parents fought for what they believed in, that they built something real from nothing. She took his hand, that they chose each other and chose love, even when the world told them not to. Colt pulled her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. I never thought I'd have this. A family, a real home. Neither did I. But here we are. They sat there holding each other as the spring sun climbed higher, warming the earth and promising growth, change, new beginnings. Over the next weeks, the valley buzzed with news of Mara's pregnancy and the fall of Marcus Eldridge and Tom Brennan. The two events seemed connected in people's minds, the triumph of good over evil, of love over manipulation, of courage over fear. Sarah Chen organized a gathering to celebrate both the coming baby and the community's survival of the difficult winter. It was held at the community hall on a warm April evening, and nearly everyone in Red Hollow attended. To new beginnings, Sam Tucker toasted, raising his glass, and to the stubbornness of two people who refused to be broken. To Colt and Mara, Jonas Webb added, who showed us all what real strength looks like. Even people who'd been skeptical or hostile before came to offer congratulations. Martha Green brought blankets she'd knitted for the baby. Beatrice Fletcher, never one to fully admit she'd been wrong, nevertheless donated a beautiful cradle that had been in her family for generations. Every child deserves a proper cradle, she said stiffly, even frontier babies. Thank you, Mara said, genuinely touched. This means more than you know. As the evening wore on and people drifted into smaller conversations, Danny approached Colt with unusual seriousness. I need to tell you something, he said. I've been offered a foreman position on a ranch up north. Better pay, more responsibility. Colt felt a pang of loss but kept his expression neutral. That's a good opportunity. It is. But I wanted you to know that I'm turning it down. What? Why? Danny grinned. Because I'd rather work for a man I respect, building something I believe in, than make more money working for strangers. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay on. Help you build this ranch into something really special. Colt clasped his shoulder, moved beyond words. We'd be honored to have you. Besides, Danny added, somebody needs to teach that baby how to ride a horse properly. Can't trust that job to just anyone. The ranch expansion began in earnest in May. Using the combined money from the inheritance and restitution, they purchased Henry Morrison's adjacent land, nearly doubling their acreage. They built a bunkhouse for the hired hands, expanded the barn, and created proper corrals for the growing herd. Mara threw herself into the work despite her pregnancy, designing a system for water management that impressed even the most experienced ranchers. She'd been reading books on agriculture and animal husbandry through the winter, teaching herself what she needed to know. You're going to work yourself into exhaustion, Colt warned, finding her one afternoon directing the placement of fence posts. I'm pregnant, not fragile. Women have been working while pregnant since the beginning of time. Not my wife. Not if I can help it. She turned to him, hands on her hips. Colt Rayner, we agreed we were partners. Equal partners. That doesn't change just because I'm carrying a child. I know, I just worry. Then worry while helping me finish this fence line. He couldn't argue with that logic. They worked together as they always had, partners in every sense of the word. In June, a letter arrived from Philadelphia that surprised them both. It was from Catherine Morrison, one of the women who'd written to warn Mara about Eldridge. Dear Mrs. Rayner, I heard about Eldridge's conviction and wanted to thank you. Your courage in standing up to him and testifying about his behavior helped give the rest of us the strength to come forward with our own stories. Because of you, he'll never hurt another woman. I also wanted you to know that your father has been making amends in Philadelphia. He's donated substantial funds to organizations that help women escape dangerous situations. He speaks openly about his mistakes and advocates for women's right to choose their own husbands. It doesn't undo the past, but it's something. I hope you found happiness in your new life. You deserve it after everything you've endured. With gratitude and respect, Catherine Morrison. Mara read the letter aloud to Colt that evening, her voice catching on certain phrases. Your father's trying, Colt observed, really trying. I know, I just don't know if trying is enough. It doesn't have to be, not yet. Maybe someday you'll feel differently. Maybe you won't. Either way is okay. How did you get so wise? Living alone for 5 years gives you a lot of time to think, and making mistakes teaches you more than getting things right ever does. Mara folded the letter carefully. I think I'd like to write back to Catherine. Tell her about the ranch, about the life we're building here. Maybe invite her to visit if she ever wants to see the frontier. That sounds like a good idea. As summer deepened, the ranch flourished, the cattle fattened on good grass, the horses multiplied. The vegetable garden Mara had planted produced more than they could eat, and she began selling surplus in town, developing a reputation for quality produce. Red Hollow itself was changing. The events of the winter had forced the community to examine itself, to question old prejudices and assumptions. Sarah Chen was elected to the town council, the first woman and first Chinese person to hold the position. Sheriff Davis implemented new policies about investigating harassment and threats. This valley's growing up, Sam Tucker observed one evening at the general store, becoming the kind of place where people are judged by their character and work, not their background or circumstances. About time, Martha Green said, though I hate to admit that it took outsiders to show us locals how things should be done. The comment was directed at Mara, who was shopping for fabric for baby clothes. She smiled. Sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to see what needs changing. Wise words from a woman who's not really an outsider anymore, Martha replied. You're as much a part of this valley as anyone born here, more than some. It was the closest thing to an apology Mara would ever get from Martha Green, and she accepted it gracefully. Tom Brennan's trial took place in August. Colt and Mara testified about the harassment, the fires, the systematic campaign of intimidation. Their testimony, combined with Frank Carson's confession and physical evidence, left no doubt of Brennan's guilt. He was sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison. As he was led away, he looked at Colt and Mara one last time. You think you've won, he said bitterly, but people don't change. This valley will turn on you eventually, just like it turned on me. The valley didn't turn on you, Mara replied. You turned on it. You chose cruelty and greed over community and honesty. That's why you're going to prison, not because of anything we did. As they left the courthouse, Colt took her hand. How do you feel? Relieved, tired, ready for this chapter to be over. It is over, all of it. Eldridge, Brennan, the threats, it's all finished. Then what comes next? He placed his hand gently on her swollen belly. This, our family, our future, building something that lasts. Mara went into labor on a September evening when the valley was painted in autumn gold. Sarah Chen was there, having stayed at the ranch for the last week in preparation. She'd helped deliver dozens of babies and moved with calm efficiency. You're doing fine, she assured Mara between contractions. First babies take their time, but everything's progressing normally. Colt paced the main room like a caged animal, jumping at every sound from the bedroom. She's going to be fine, Danny said, trying to sound reassuring. Miss Mara's tougher than boot leather. I know. I just hate that I can't do anything to help. You already did your part, Li Chen said with a grin. Now it's her turn. The labor lasted through the night. Colt sat outside the bedroom door, listening to Mara's cries and Sarah's calm encouragements, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. Just before dawn, a new sound joined the others, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. Sarah opened the door, her face tired but radiant. You have a daughter, and your wife is asking for you. Colt entered the bedroom to find Mara propped against pillows, exhausted and sweaty and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Come meet your daughter, Mara said softly. He approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. The baby was impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. When he touched one hand, the infant's fingers closed around his, gripping with surprising strength. She's perfect, he whispered. She is. Mara looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. We made her, Colt. We made this perfect little person together. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, putting his arm around Mara so he could hold them both. What should we name her? They'd discussed names for months but never settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter's face, Mara knew. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope. Hope Rayner, Colt tested it. It's perfect, just like her. Sarah bustled around tidying up, giving them space but staying close in case she was needed. I'll let everyone know mother and baby are doing well. The whole valley's been waiting for news. Over the next days, visitors streamed to the ranch bringing gifts and congratulations. Sam Tucker brought a hand-carved cradle. Jonas Webb delivered a rocking chair. Even Reverend Thomas stopped by to offer blessings and well wishes. The community that had once viewed Mara with suspicion now celebrated her daughter as one of their own. Hope Rayner belonged to the valley in a way her parents had to earn, born into a place her parents had transformed through courage and persistence. As autumn deepened toward winter, Mara sat in the rocking chair by the fire, nursing Hope while Colt worked on the ranch accounts. The domestic scene was so different from where they'd started, two wary strangers circling each other, not sure if they could trust. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Mara asked. "When I stepped off the stagecoach?" Colt looked up from his ledger. "All the time. I think about the woman standing there in her city dress, looking terrified but determined. I had no idea what I was getting into." "Neither did I. I thought you might be a criminal or a brute or worse. And instead I found the best man I've ever known. A partner, a friend, the love of my life." Colt set aside his work and came to sit beside them, looking down at Hope's sleeping face. "I was so alone before you came. I'd convinced myself I preferred it that way, that solitude was strength. You showed me I was wrong." "We saved each other," Mara said simply. "That's what love does." Winter came again, but this time they were ready. The barn was solid, the herd healthy and protected. They had supplies enough for months and money in the bank for emergencies. More than that, they had each other and the tiny life they'd created together. On Christmas Eve, they hosted a gathering at the ranch, the first time they'd opened their home to the community on such a scale. The house was filled with neighbors and friends, with music and laughter and the warmth of shared celebration. Sarah held Hope, cooing over her while Lee played fiddle. Danny danced with Martha Green's daughter, much to everyone's amusement. Sam Tucker and Jonas Webb argued good-naturedly about cattle breeding while their wives swapped recipes. Colt stood to the side, taking it all in. This life he'd built, this family he'd found, this community he'd become part of despite all his attempts to remain separate. Mara appeared at his elbow, slipping her hand into his. "Happy?" "More than I ever thought possible." "Me too." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate woman who answered an advertisement. Thank you for being brave enough to answer it." They stood together watching their friends and neighbors celebrate, watching their daughter sleep peacefully in Sarah's arms, feeling the solid weight of everything they'd built together. Later, after everyone had gone home and Hope was tucked into her cradle, Colt and Mara stood on the porch looking out at the snow-covered valley. "A year ago we were fighting for survival," Mara observed. "Now look at us. Now we're living, not just surviving, but actually living. Building something that will outlast us," Mara added. "Something Hope will inherit and hopefully pass on to her own children someday." Colt pulled her close against the cold. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "We chose this. Every step of the way we chose each other and chose this life. Nobody forced us. Nobody made us. We built it ourselves from nothing but determination and hope." "And love," Mara added. "Don't forget love. Never." They went inside where the fire was warm and their daughter slept, and everything they'd fought for waited in the quiet peace of a winter night. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Droughts and harsh winters, illness and injury, the constant demands of frontier life. But Colt and Mara faced them all together, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. They expanded the ranch further, eventually becoming one of the largest and most successful operations in the territory. Danny became foreman and eventually married Sarah Chen's niece, building his own house on a corner of their land. More children followed Hope, 2 boys and another girl, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter and chaos. Mara never returned to Philadelphia, though she maintained correspondence with Catherine Morrison and eventually with her father. Richard Ellison never remarried, instead dedicating his remaining years to charitable work and advocating for women's rights. When he died, he left his entire estate to Mara, with a letter apologizing once more for his failures and expressing pride in the life she'd built. Red Hollow continued to grow and change, shaped in part by the example Colt and Mara had set. The valley became known as a place where people were judged by their character rather than their origins, where hard work and integrity mattered more than social standing or wealth. Sarah Chen served 3 terms on the town council, eventually becoming mayor. She and Lee's boarding house became famous throughout the territory for its hospitality and excellent food. Their children grew up alongside Hope and her siblings, all of them belonging to the valley in a way that transcended the prejudices their parents had faced. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Colt and Mara rode up to the ridge overlooking the ranch. The buildings had multiplied. The main house expanded to accommodate their growing family. The barn rebuilt twice to handle their increased herd, a schoolhouse they'd helped build for the valley's children. "Remember when this was nothing but empty land and possibility?" Mara asked. "I remember when it was empty land and loneliness," Colt corrected. "You brought the possibility. We brought it together." They sat on their horses watching Hope, now 20 years old, work with her brothers in the corral below, training a new colt with patience and skill. She'd inherited her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength, and she handled the ranch work as naturally as breathing. "She's going to run this place someday," Colt observed with pride. "She already does half the work. She just lets us think we're still in charge." They rode back down as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. The ranch hands were coming in from the day's work. Smoke rose from the chimney where dinner was cooking. The whole scene spoke of permanence, of roots sunk deep, of a legacy built to last. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Colt and Mara sat together on the porch where they'd spent so many evenings over the years. "Do you ever regret it?" Colt asked. "Giving up the life you could have had?" Mara laughed. "What life? Being Marcus Eldridge's trophy wife, living in a gilded cage, suffocating under rules I didn't make? That wasn't a life. That was a slow death dressed up in silk and pearls. And this? This is everything I never knew I wanted. Hard work and honest sweat. Children who are strong and free. A husband who treats me as an equal. A community we helped build. A future we created with our own hands." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 20 years of practice. "This is life, Colt, real life, and I wouldn't trade a single moment of it." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the valley, cattle lowing in the distance, the soft rustle of wind through grass, the call of an owl hunting over the fields. "I love you," Colt said. He'd gotten better at saying it over the years, though it still carried the weight of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "I love you too," Mara replied. "Thank you for giving me a chance when you had no reason to trust me. Thank you for being brave enough to take it." The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. Somewhere in the house, one of the children called out in sleep, then settled again. The ranch that had been born from desperation and hope continued its quiet existence, a testament to what 2 people could build when they chose courage over fear, partnership over isolation, love over everything else. Mara thought back to that terrified woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach into judgment and uncertainty, and she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She'd come west running from a life that would have destroyed her, and she'd found a life worth living. More than that, she'd helped create it. Every fence mended, every animal tended, every challenge faced had been a choice, a declaration that she would not be defined by her past or limited by others' expectations. She'd chosen freedom, chosen Colt, chosen this hard, beautiful frontier life. And in choosing, she'd found herself. The woman who'd arrived in Red Hollow seeking safety had discovered something far more valuable: purpose, partnership, and a love that had transformed them both. She'd learned that home wasn't a place you were given, but something you built with your own hands and heart. That family wasn't just blood, but the people who stood beside you when the world tried to tear you down. That strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. "Come to bed," Colt said finally, standing and offering his hand. Mara took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They walked inside together, closing the door on the night and the world beyond, secure in the fortress they'd built not from wood and stone, but from trust and choice and stubborn, enduring love. The ranch would be there in the morning, waiting for their care and attention. The valley would continue its eternal rhythms, season following season, year following year. Their children would grow and eventually build their own lives, carrying forward the lessons their parents had taught them about courage and persistence in choosing your own path. But tonight, Colt and Mara Rayner simply held each other in the darkness. Two people who'd started as strangers and become everything to each other, grateful for the chances they'd taken and the life they'd built from the ashes of their broken pasts. They'd proven that love could survive anything: scandal, sabotage, social rejection, poverty, the brutal frontier winter. They'd shown an entire valley that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. That home wasn't where you came from, but what you built with your own hands. That the most important choice anyone makes is who to stand beside when the world turns against you. And they'd done it together, partners in every sense, rewriting the rules of what marriage could be, what life could be, what love could accomplish, when given the freedom to grow. In the end, the mail-order bride and the lonely rancher had become something neither had imagined when that first letter was written. They'd become home to each other, proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust a stranger, take a chance, and choose hope over certainty. And in choosing, build a life worth living, a future worth fighting for, a love worth everything.